All right, welcome to our first meeting of the Blockchain Select Committee for this interim. We're happy to be in Jackson, Wyoming in mid-May for this lovely meeting, and the drive-in was incredible. We've got a good agenda. Welcome everybody who has joined us and flown into Jackson to participate. We've got a number of our members online. Let's start off with roll call, and then we'll have some opening comments.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. This is roll call for the Select Committee on Blockchain for May 20th. Senator Ellis, Senator Furphy,
Excused.
Senator Nethercott,
Excused.
Representative Andrew.
Here.
Representative Singh,
Here.
Representative Yin,
Excused, and he's on his way. I know he's just about here.
Mr. Kaufman,
Here.
Mr. Pope,
Here.
Mr. Revel,
Here.
Co-Chairman Western,
Here.
Chairman Rothfuss.
Here.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. So starting off with decorum and how we run the meeting, for those that are participating, we want to make sure that all of the testimony that's given comes through the co-chairman, either me or my partner here, Representative Western. Work through the chairs, participate, provide public comment. There will be an opportunity for public comment after every topic that we have on the agenda, and we welcome that public comment. It's a big part of our process, so please don't hesitate if you have some thoughts or anything to provide that you participate when you have that opportunity. And I'm confident that everyone will participate in a very beneficial way, and we won't have to do anything otherwise. So with that, Mr. Chairman, any opening comments before we get into our agenda?
Mr. Co-Chairman, appreciate that. Just really excited for this interim. You know, we've had a lot of conversations in the last couple of months about these topics and consultation with some folks, and I think it's a really good interim agenda. I'm really looking forward to some of the discussion. And so, Mr. Co-Chair, I really appreciate all the work you put in to this agenda, and of course to all the ones and all the work that this committee has done over the years. So looking forward to it.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. And with that, let's get started. And we're starting off with general updates, as we typically do, to kind of hear what's going on, what we've done in the legislature a little bit, what we've seen around the country, and hear the progress. We did have some good work done in the legislative session. We'll be contemplating some of that and going over it. But we're going to start with an update from the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. And I know that we have online Executive Director Anthony Apollo and Commissioner Naves from the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. Welcome, and we can start with the Executive Director and welcome comments from Commissioner Naves.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. You have Anthony Apollo here, Executive Director of the Wyoming Stable Token Commission. I am joined in the room by Commissioner Flavia Naves, also of counsel at Hathaway & Coons and formerly General Counsel at Circle. She's about 2 feet that way, so there might be some microphone management along the way. So please bear with if there's any overlap as we go. I'll also note that we have Commissioner Pope on the line, and I don't know if I heard Commissioner Reville's name, but it looks like he is in the room. So noting that, I want to quickly just ask that if any other commissioners from the Wyoming Stable Token Commission are on the line, that we would have them quickly drop off, because we don't want to contravene any of our rules around forum and public meetings from our perspective. So
it's a good point, Executive Director. Thank you for that. And I should have pointed out, yes, we have Commissioner Pope, who is also a member of our select committee, and Commissioner Revel, who is also a member of our select committee. So we do have a little bit of overlap. So thanks for pointing that out.
Excellent. I don't see anyone. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I don't see anyone on the participant list either in the commission. So I think we are good to go. So in terms of today's update, what I'd like to start with is a quick industry update, so we can kind of frame the larger conversation around stable coins and keep that breezy. We'll then talk about where we are with the Stable Token Commission's budget, both for the 23 biennium and then the 2025 biennium, and incorporated in all of that will be updates from our side from the legislative session. We will then segue into some of the developments on our side around our discussions with potential vendors and subject matter experts from subcommittees, and how we are looking to bring forward development and engagement on the build out of a Wyoming stable token. and then quickly touch on some of the topics that we are working on currently in flight that are being workshopped along the way as we have our monthly public meetings of the Stable Token Commission. I'll note the next one of those will be this Thursday here in Cheyenne from 9 to 12 a.m. in room W113. And with that, Mr. Co-Chair, I'd like to get started. That's all I have here.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So generally speaking, from an industry perspective, the stable token market has grown significantly since our last conversation in November. Around then, the market was about $135 billion. We're now looking at a market cap of about $160 billion, so an increase of about 19 to 20%. On-chain transactions denominated in stable tokens have also increased significantly, to the point where stable token transactions are more than half of all transactions across blockchain networks. And further, if we look at some of the numbers for April, the top 3 stable tokens that are utilized now, their transaction volume now rivals that of Visa's own network, given their monthly averages from last year. So we're seeing significant increases in stable token utilization across the board. There's also several new entrants being developed, and we highlight these every month in our commission meetings. Some interesting ones just to throw out there. One that was released in February is called Athena, builds itself as a synthetic dollar. Does a lot of interesting things that we wouldn't necessarily do. Doesn't really fit into our risk appetite here in the Stable Token Commission, but they do offer a significantly large interest or yield on their stable token, about 30% now. And they launched in February, already by April have $1 billion market cap. So we've had questions along the way about whether there's still space for new entrants. I think as different models roll out, we'll see that there is space for more of these in the near future. We've also seen a number of new announcements of stable tokens like those from Agora or Angle that are all being developed over offshore or overseas, likely due to the perceived difficulty in understanding the regulatory environment here in the US. So some of these yield-bearing stable tokens are going offshore and spinning up there, which has been interesting to see. And I think we'll have some discussion about policy in a little bit, but quickly before that, I also mentioned that several larger corporations are getting into, or at least looking at pilot stablecoins themselves, including the bank of Sony, which makes the PlayStation. They are also piloting a stable token project on the Polygon blockchain as we speak. So again, we're seeing momentum in this sector writ large. I mentioned a second ago the regulatory environment that's developing domestically. I'm going to defer conversation on that to the Office of Senator Lummis that will be speaking in a few minutes. That being said, I'm more than happy to give any of our perspective on it, but we're obviously following the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act, which is FIT 21, that's being voted on in the House this week. The Lummis-Gillibrand Payment Stable Token Act was released about a month ago, and the McHenry bill, the Clarity for Payment Stablecoins Act, is still in flight. So that's a bit of a broad industry perspective. Again, we cover that in all of our monthly meetings, but I'll quickly pause there in case there's any questions just on some of these metrics or where the market may be going.
Thank you, Mr. Apollo. Any questions at this time before he proceeds? Any questions? Let me look online. All right, seeing none, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So to give a discussion of where we are with our budget for the biennial year 2023, which ends on June 30th, so in about a month and change. When the Stable Token Act created the Stable Token Commission, as part of that statute, the commission was given an initial allocation of $500,000 in budget. To date, we have spent about $202,000 of that initial allocation, predominantly on personnel and some external vendors that we're working with to help us better understand things like securities laws implications vis-a-vis stable tokens. We are projecting to spend about $230,000 of that initial allocation by the June 30th date. So net, we project to spend less than 50% of the initial allocation that the commission has been given. And we really try to be good stewards of the funds we've received. As a reminder, the obligation for the commission is to pay back to the general fund all of the dollars that it takes from the general fund. So we are trying to be good fiscal stewards here, and generally speaking, it'll be easier for us to repay those funds with the less we spend. So we have looked to be wise in our spending there. As we transition over to the next biennium, we'll get into a little bit of discussion around the budget session as well. So after some back and forth in the budget session, the Stable Token Commission's one-time exception request for $5.8 million was successfully passed and included in the state's biennial budget. There are two quick stipulations I want to call out around that. So the first is when when the agency's budget was reinserted into the budget bill after it had been defunded at one point, there was wording added that the Wyoming Stable Token Commission shall endeavor to contract with only Wyoming domiciled entities when conducting business funded by the transfer required by this subsection. Subsequently, when the governor performed his line item vetoes to the budget bill, there was one edit made to remove the word only. So it now reads the Wyoming Stable Token Commission shall endeavor to contact with Wyoming domiciled entities when conducting businesses funded by the transfer required by the subsection. And further, Governor Gordon stated that the commission shall endeavor to work with Wyoming domiciled entities, but we do not want to cause undue hardship on the commission as it has no control over the location of qualified entities. So I just wanted to make sure we highlighted that because that did happen a few days after the session ended. The second thing I quickly want to highlight is in the budget bill, the agency did not receive any allocation of permanent employees, either full-time or part-time. Now, the commission does have the statutory authority to employ a director and employees as it deems necessary for the performance of its duties, and shall prescribe the powers and duties and fix the compensation of the director and those employees. So we have the ability to configure things as we need to. However, at this time, the assumption is that we will be moving forward contracting new roles in an AWAC capacity. So that's at-will employee contractors, technically non-permanent employees. The thesis there is we want to make sure that the commission and this offering that we're creating is economically viable before we bring on any permanent employees to the commission. So to that extent, the commission has agreed to offer me an extended contract through the next biennium. And further, we are in the process of creating job descriptions and postings for 4 other roles, which would include a senior project manager, a chief financial officer, a chief risk and compliance officer, and a chief information security officer. So that again covers us on budget and personnel as we move forward. I also want to clarify or discuss some of the amendments to the Stable Token Act that were passed during the session. So there were 2 that were fairly critical that I want to highlight. One is around our procurement policy. So the agency highlighted that there would be some difficulties in trying to create a novel financial instrument on emerging technology through some of the processes that we currently use in the state. So we were able to get rulemaking capacity through the statute, and we now have the ability to do our own procurement process through a competitive bid. So we are now in the process of creating our own procurement rule set. That'll need to go through the rulemaking process itself, but the goal is for us to have the ability to engage with vendors as we think will best benefit the agency itself as well as the state of Wyoming. The second update to the Stable Token Act was in regards to the assets that the commission is allowed to invest in terms of the assets that form the reserves and would be held in a trust account. So the original legislation said that the commission shall invest funds within the account exclusively in U.S. states treasury bills. If you recall from our last meeting in November, we workshopped some wording with the treasurer's office. And the final wording that we netted out with during the budget session was the commission can invest exclusively in cash, United States Treasury securities with a maturity of 365 days or less, or United States Treasury security repurchase agreements with a term of 30 days or less. And that's in line with best practices we see from existing stable token issuers and some of the proposed legislation, both domestically and internationally. I will just kind of to hammer one point in that the cash piece is also very important. We need to make sure that we have some cash on hand to remain liquidity for redemptions of the stable tokens. If someone wants to send us Wyoming stable tokens and take cash out, those dollars will be there for fairly immediate redemption. So that covers all where we are on the budget side of things, as well as the legislative session. I would quickly ask that if Commissioner Navas has anything to add, that should be recognized by the co-chairs, and then I would happily answer any questions on this section of our agenda here.
Thank you, Director. Commissioner Navas, anything to add?
Thank you, Anthony. Yes, I think the most important point to emphasize here is the progress in the procurement policy. The speed in which the Commission needs to act mirrors the speed of the industry. And we were being, having to follow certain processes that are required by different agencies of the state. We're hampering the ability of the Commission to contract with different vendors or speak to different parties in a way that would advance our mission, as well as the same time keeping up with the pace of the industry. So being able to work on that procurement policy and actually put in place something that not only observes the transparency that is required for a governmental agency to be able to act upon, but also to ensure that we're keeping up with the developments in the stablecoin issuance and other participants, it's critical for the success of the Commission and for this token to be issued in a timely manner. So we'll be working very closely and obviously seeking the expertise of the Attorney General's office and other entities of the Wyoming government to support us in the development of that policy.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioner. Any of the other commissioners want to add anything? Okay. Seeing none. Questions? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. And I think maybe this is for Apollo or for Commissioner Naves or whoever wants to jump in, but maybe go a little bit more into the procurement process that you guys need to be nimble and securing these contracts and these vendors that we quite frankly have to stand up this token. So could you maybe do a little bit of a deeper dive on that, if you wouldn't mind?
Absolutely,
I
Mr.
don't know.
Co-Chairman.
Go ahead, Director Apollo.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. So just to quickly level set, I want to make it very clear that we're not creating something new from scratch. And is there an audio? You guys can hear me okay? So, okay, excellent, thank you. So we are looking at several other policies or sets of rules from other agencies who have done very much the same, particularly the State Construction Department was the most recent set of procurement rules that went through the formal rulemaking process. So we're looking at that. Where this comes down to for us is there'd be a lot of difficulty in, for example, one thing we struggle with is having a bit of a silent period where we could not communicate with the external vendors who may be interested in proposing work on the project as we see changes in real time, right? As there's changes to networks, as new technology gets rolled out, if we have to have a 30+ day moratorium on being able to speak with any of these potential vendors, that could create some difficulties for us. One other thing that comes to mind is something that Commissioner Reville has pointed out in the past, which is the need for us to make sure that given vendors that we're speaking with may be in different verticals. So perhaps we have a team we're talking to on the technology side that's writing smart contracts, that's doing work in mobile applications, or on the blockchain side of things. We'll need to understand how their technology stack could interface with a provider on the finance side, right? If their APIs are compatible, if they have the same kind of real-time data reporting, or there be different lags from a timing perspective on when information will be coming into a certain system. And with the current procurement processes where we wouldn't be able to engage in conversations as we are learning more, we would find that to be very difficult to make sure we were getting the best information possible, to make sure that if we were to engage these two parties down the road, that we wouldn't get to a point where we just get through proposals, get through engagements, and then get to a point where we try to start building and their technology doesn't work together.
Excellent. Follow-up, Mr. Co-Chairman?
No, thank you.
All right. Other questions? Representative Singh, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for Director Apollo. You said that the stable token market has grown upwards of 12%. Is this because of any sort of disruptive introduction to the market or some sort of centralized government adopting the use of cryptocurrency? Can you tell us about that?
Go ahead, Director Apollo, thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, Representative Singh. So a lot of that growth has come as we've seen volatility in some of the leading cryptos in terms of their market cap, right? So we've seen Bitcoin go up and down, we've seen Ethereum go up and down. A lot of times in those situations, there is flight to a more stable store of value on a blockchain network. So that was part of the rise in stable tokens that came as we saw Bitcoin rise pretty rapidly, and then they started to come down. A lot of that funding, you could say, kind of went into the stable token sector. That being said, we do have other industry participants joining, like Athena that I highlighted before. That's essentially $1 billion worth of market cap. Well, it was $2 billion worth of market cap that was spun up over the course of a month or two. That's the speed that we're seeing this move at. I would not say any of that growth comes due to CBDCs or anything that's adopted by any kind of centralized banking system.
Thank you, Director. A follow-up, Representative? Any further questions before they proceed? Seeing none, Director Paulo, back to you. Director Paulo, you are muted.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I really swore I hit that button. So since we last spoke, I believe it was
Director
last time-
Paulo, Director Paulo, if you wouldn't mind, I think there's a lot of background information or feedback in the room you're in. Can you take the mic on your headset and put it closer to your mouth? Because sometimes I don't know if I'm the only one in here that's having a little bit of a tough time hearing everything, but maybe that'll help a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Hopefully this is a little better.
A little better.
I think it's a little better. Proceed, please. Sorry. Apologies, Mr. Cook.
Thank you. If it's still an issue, we could see if I can switch over to my laptop. I'll give it another moment here. So moving on through the agenda on our side, wanted to briefly touch on our discussions with vendors and subject matter experts around the development of a stable token. So when we had our last meeting, I believe we had just kicked off our request for information process. So since that conversation started, to date, I've spoken with 463 contacts, so either text or emails, met with 324 of them, and this is across 239 companies that are interested in some way, shape, or form providing or proposing a book of, vendor services, so engagement through a formal contract and going through the bidding and proposal process, or people who want to help serve on our subcommittees who may not have anything to sell us, but are industry experts working on stable coins, working on the different financial mechanisms that would kind of back these, and they're looking to help us. So there is a significant amount of interest in this project, and I think that is a real feather in our cap for the work that the Select Committee has done to date on being a leader in this sector and doing years of work that's now being recognized as we bring this product to fruition. In terms of those conversations, the outcome of those, along the way, we've identified somewhere between 25 to 30 different functions that we believe we'll need to build out a Wyoming stable token, issue it, and then continue its maintenance along the way. Again, this would fall into these four verticals of finance, technology, legal, and operations. And we are, based on the discussions we've had with the commission a month or two ago, we're now considering consolidating those 30-ish functions across 5 or 6 RFPs. One would be for the larger technical build out and smart contracts where these tokens can be purchased, embedded KYC or AML, mobile applications, those kind of technologies. On the finance side, this is where we're assessing whether a third party can help us with taking in fiat currencies and custodying the treasuries, doing the rotation of repurchase agreements overnight. And then we also look to have 2 different RFPs for what Couch's audit. One would be on the code side, so a review of the code, not only the smart contracts, but our tech stack, generally speaking. And then also a audit for the financials, really make sure that we can get as close to a real-time reconciliation between how many Wyoming stable tokens are outstanding versus how much we have in reserves in the bank, right? And whether that's cash or treasuries. And I'll also highlight that in the discussions we've had previously and the discussion in the conversations we've had with potential vendors, we've always highlighted that those services can be provided by one counterparty, so a singular company, or a consortium of companies that's working as one cohesively. And again, the goal for us is to minimize the number of counterparties that we need to engage with, while also maximizing their capabilities and experience that we need to leverage for the actual build out of the Wyoming stable token. Also on that point, our remit from the Select Committee to the Stable Token Commission is to take a multi-chain approach and really look to get a Wyoming stable token on however many blockchains it makes economic sense for us to. And it's not all economic sense, there's also security considerations and functionality considerations, but the goal here is to be across several different networks when we kind of reach maturity on this product. And one of the things I want to highlight that we did in December was engage the University of Wyoming's Center for Blockchain and Digital Innovation, who helped us with a report that assessed 15 different blockchains, looking at about a dozen quantitative and a dozen qualitative metrics to kind of put all of these different chains into comparison to each other, because there is no one perfect metric to point to that says we should launch here for X reason. It'll be the kind of a pastiche of different reasons why you may want to launch in places 1, 2, or 3, or prioritize them. I want to quickly thank the university, Professor Lubian and his students for helping us put that together in a very tight timeline before year end to get that report done. And also mention all these materials are available on our website, which you can find at stabletoken.wyo.gov. And I think we're already coming up about the 9 o'clock mark here. So I'll just quickly mention a few things that we have in flight. So one item I mentioned is rulemaking. We will need to go through the formal rulemaking process for, we think now, about 3 different topics. One of those will be the procurement side of things. We already covered that. We'll also need to create rules for how the reserves of the tokens are handled. And that's something we have some guidance from existing issuers and organizations like the New York DFS, as well as the some of the proposed legislation that's out there. And then the other set we'll need to look to is actually creating rules for the token issuance itself, how we do issuance and redemptions and everything in between. And then I'm also saying that's probably a little bit difficult to understand what I'm saying, but I apologize. It's I'm going to unplug my microphone real quick and speak to my laptop and see if that helps to finish things out here. So just a couple other things. We're still working kind of on in the background, updates to our business plan, revenue model, and a white paper that will be very specific in terms of which technologies we're looking to use and how we're looking to leverage them, as well as some of the legal analysis that we're performing about how this kind of fits into the existing regulatory system. And with that being said, I quickly just pause again to see if Commissioner Naves could be recognized for her any feedback she may have. But other than that, I think that would be it from my side. I'm happy to say any questions to commissioners.
Thank you, Director. Commissioner Naves, anything to add?
First, I want to make sure that there is no, wait a second, please. Should be good now. Is there feedback or can I speak? Or you guys can hear me well?
We can hear you. Yep.
Thank you so much. As Anthony mentioned, with the mandate of being a multi-chain token, the one factor that is going to weigh very heavily as we develop the operational elements of this token is the selection of the first chain. That will be done alongside the process of, once we have these vendors and we start looking at them, we're going to start, gathering all the information needed. Another critical element to ensure the successful selection of the initial chain is going to be the hiring of the compliance and risk officer, as well as the CISO. Those individuals are going to bring not only the subject matter expertise, but the operational expertise of the token and these chains to ensure that the selection is being done to account for not only the quantitative or qualitative metrics, as the university so wisely helped us with, but also to just consider at that time which chain remains the most of higher adoption. If you look at other participants that are in the industry today, you can get a sense of that adoption rate. However, as I mentioned earlier, because this industry moves so quickly, it could be that we identify in the next 6 to 12 months another chain that will provide not only the stability that is required for the launch of this token, the trust that is needed, but the widest adoption for the successful launch of this product. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions? 1 second, we're getting a little feedback. Please stand by for technical pause. There we go. All right. So any questions for Commissioner Naves or Director Apollo? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Director, I really appreciate your commitment to doing things the Wyoming way and running lean and mean and relying on AWAC employees and all that stuff. But my question is this, for this to take off, we're going to need those in-house executives who have those experience, and obviously, chief technology officer, all that kind of stuff. What kind of timeline roughly are we working with to bringing those folks in, staffed up, and all that kind of stuff?
Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I'm trying with my microphone one more time in case the feedback was coming from inside your room and not my headset. Any better?
So what we're experiencing is a combination of room and your mic, actually, a little bit, but you're fine. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So from our perspective, we are looking to get these listings up as soon as possible. However, one of the things that we are considering is whether it makes sense to bring these resources on as full-time from the get-go. It may make sense to bring some of these roles on as, part-time AWAC employees, and then as we build towards the launch of the token, then engage them in a full-time capacity once we are launched, and then once we reach economic viability here, the goal would be to bring everyone on perhaps a permanent capacity, knowing full well we'll have operational expenses paid for going forward based on how much revenue we're able to generate any given quarter based on the underlying reserves. So there are a couple of permutations of how we can do this that I think will enable us to bring on talent as quickly as possible, while also again remaining keeping our budget front of mind, and also just the practicality of a rollout. We still need to do some design work and development before we actually start building a solution.
Thank you, Director. Any follow-up, Mr. Co-Chairman?
No.
Other questions? I wanted to ask a little bit about the multi-chain discussion and the process for that. We've had a lot of discussion about this, and obviously the intent, and I know that you share this interest, is to try not to appear to be picking winners, but to keep things open to a multitude of blockchains at the same time. I understand that there will need to be one coming online first effectively, because you have to go through a process, of scrutiny to ensure that you have full compliance, and you don't want to be doing that multiple times at the same time, particularly on the 1.0. My question, though, is about how to proceed in a way that continues to make it clear that we're not trying to pick winners, and was wondering if a selection of multiple chains as partners might be something that could be done, while then saying, all right, one of these 5, and I'm being arbitrary in that number. I don't know what your decision process looks like of the number of chains that you can currently consider to be viable, but let's arbitrarily say it's 5. These are 5 partners that we would like to work with, and we would like to see all of them hosting Wyoming Stable Token on chain in the near future. And then again, with the altered procurement, it seems that would then allow entities focused on each of those chains to continue to proceed development of those chains. And then at some point, you have one of those 5 that rises up because they're in first place, we'll say, in terms of their development compliance and reaching whatever milestones are in place. And then that one gets gated as the first to go live, knowing that the next one that's ready is the next to go live, in theory, a month or 3 months later, whatever the case may be. Is there a process like that could allow continuous development to ensure that those that are interested in partnering with us still feel like they're in the game? I don't want anyone to feel isolated, obviously, and I wonder if there's a process to allow that while still respecting all of the compliance side critical issues that really require us to be bringing one of them live at a time with some delay afterwards to ensure that it's accurate. Director, thoughts on that? And Commissioner Naves, either of you? Go ahead, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. So from my perspective, I would be a little trepidatious about, let's say, offering what we refer to as partnerships. And again, acknowledging that we would be able to perhaps just call it by a different name and carve it up a different way. But I would be a little hesitant based on my understanding of not only the procurement process, but generally how things operate here, of creating something that would look like a business-like relationship that we couldn't put a firm date or delivery on based on essentially asking different groups to do work without giving them a finite end date or goal. And I'll just kind of put that as a gut reaction to the proposal. What I will say is I do acknowledge that there are multiple different organizations that are very interested in building with us, and we should absolutely work with them to figure out how that can work long term. I do think that there is interesting technology coming online that can help us do that faster. Again, we will need to kind of do a lot of testing and compliance and all of that we already acknowledged, but technology like cross-chain transfer protocols or cross-chain interoperability protocols may allow us to expedite the stand-up of different smart contracts across different networks that would be able to essentially talk to each other based on some of these different relays and messaging protocols that are coming to fruition now. Some of which we've spoken with along the way as part of those vendor discussions we've had conversations with. So I know that's a bit of a high level answer, but I would probably pause there just based on where we are in our own kind of development roadmap.
Thank you, Director. Commissioner Navas, did you have anything to add to that? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. I agree with Anthony that referencing a partnership may not be the correct approach. What we can do as a commission is discuss which 5 initial chains would be the ones that we will look to go through the review process. And through that review process, determine whether they are suitable to meet all the needs, as well as including, information security and compliance and risk. And by doing that assessment, we would then rank to what was stated previously, which one is going to go first, second, third. One critical element as we launch each one of these chains is ensuring that the first one doesn't break, right? So it's giving the time in which for that token to be launched and actually transacted in a chain in a successful manner. And then launch the second, and then the third, and then the fourth in that cadence. Launching multiple chains at one time does not afford stability and could actually potentially impair the success of that launch. So the recommendation would be to look at those in scale. But as mentioned, we could, as a commission, consider a selection of a number of chains and then go through a process of reviewing them for the elements that the commission believes to be required to meet the needs of a token launch. And to Anthony's point as well, consider cross-chain protocols in the future, but again, also assessing for the stability and for the, the potential risk. There is some risk in utilizing CTTP, but as you work with these chains, you can minimize those by putting certain controls in place.
Thank you, Commissioner. And yes, my choice of words of partnership might have been too strong. I really was meaning these are the chains that we'd like to see a Wyoming stable token issued on in the near future. And I think that process, Commissioner Navas, that you described of having a vetting process and trying to get to what those 5 might be is a concern. But we know that there are quite a few that are interested in working with Wyoming stable token and seeing an issuance of Wyoming stable token on those chains. And I'm sensitive to ensuring that we maintain that goodwill and that it doesn't feel like, well, the first blockchain is this particular blockchain and everyone else just takes their ball and goes home. Whatever we can do to ensure that that isn't the case and that all 5, for example, of those blockchains are eagerly engaged, as I know they are now, if there's a way to do that. So I think you all and the commission understands that sensitivity. So just something to contemplate. Any further comments or discussion? Mr. Co-Chairman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I suppose this question is directed at Director Paulo or Ms. Navas, but really anybody who can, is an expert on this. my understanding was that given the nature of some of these chains, it's tough for them to, to kind of work with each other and have a protocol that can do this type of thing where we can have an issuance on multiple chains. So my question is, has there been any improvement on the ability, is there a new protocol out there that can make this type of option possible for us? So we're not necessarily all in on any particular chain.
Anyone like to field that, Director?
Co-chair, happy to do so. What I will say is, really sure, I think we'll be able to use some names here. Public information, right? So Circle has its own internal cross-chain interoperability protocol, right? So I believe Circle is USDC, their stable token is currently on 60 plus chains, and they've developed their own internal transfer protocol, interoperability protocol that'll help them bridge across different networks, in a much more finite period of time. And then there's also open source options available as well. So ones you wouldn't necessarily need to engage a company to build out, but you can just leverage existing code that is freely available through code repositories. And some of those would be, Axelar or Layer 0. So these are all options that are becoming more mature by the day, more utilized by the day. And again, the developments on those are public information. I would suggest anyone who's interested in learning more, I'm happy to get into the conversation a bit more of a technical depth offline, or that information is, you can find that readily available on the internet.
Commissioner Navas, anything to add?
No, Anthony well summarized. There's native issuance and 17 chains for USDC right now. This is available on usdc.cool, which is a website that will be displaying to you the circulation of USDC on real time. And CCTP is then utilized to transfer into protocols, and as well as ensure that you can be, instead of relying on just native issuance in each one of these chains. Again, the commission will at the time look to determine what kind of operational requirements, controls, and assessments are needed, not only for native issuance, but as the reliance on a CCTP. This will be put up for the commission's vote with the guidance of the compliance and risk officer and the CISO that are to be hired by the commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Navas. Mr. Pope, I see your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What multi-chain issuance becomes a real issue for is the management of it, and the as far as the redemptions, the backing, and the flow between the flow of capital between the chains. And we've identified that those are audit issues as well as, like I said, management issues, but nothing that hasn't been solved prior.
Thank you, Mr. Pope. Further questions? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I mean, would that be feasible for the Stable Token Commission? I mean, Circle's done it, right? Obviously, they have an army of developers and expertise that can do that kind of stuff, which we don't have at this time. But how feasible would it be for the Stable Token to have that kind of cross-chain transfer protocol?
Who wants to field that one? Director Apollo, you want to take a stab? Go ahead.
Happy to, Mr. Co-Chair. So I think it's quite feasible. Again, I would defer to Commissioner Navas's comment that it's going to come down to an assessment of the compliance, the security, Commissioner Pope's note about the auditability of a given chain. These are where some, if the technology is there and it sounds, some of it is open source and can easily be leveraged. And that's where the complications are more regulatory or around transparency and visibility than it is a technical issue.
Thank you, Director. And again, this also seems like something that doesn't need to be part of the 1.0 release timeline. This is something that can be done later. I think it seems that the idea of having it behind the wall of our operations instead of out in the public reduces the risk. And even if there's public engagement on cross-chain, we may not want to be involved in that public version of it to diminish our risk and only do it on the behind the wall to make sure that we maintain control of that risk. But again, am I correct in characterizing that as not something you're necessarily going to worry about in the near future? But once we have several chains up, we start going down that path and figuring out what the best approach is. Is that accurate?
Mr. Co-Chair, from my perspective, it is something that I do believe the deployment of it would be what we refer to as a day two item for the time being. But it's certainly something that we're assessing as part of the initial build, because when we create V1, even though that'll be a bit more gated in terms of functionality or distribution, we do want to do the design from the onset in a way that would encompass some functionality we anticipate having shortly thereafter. So I think it's deployment later, but from a design perspective, we're very much looking into how that could be brought into the scope of the Wyoming Stable Token in due time.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you. Further questions? Further questions? Director Apollo, anything else to add? Or any more talking points? We may
Mr.
still have
Co-Chair,
them.
nothing from myself, nothing from my side at this time.
Anything else, committee? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman. Okay.
Mr. Revelle, he's looking very.
Anything to add, Mr. Revelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just add that I think the potential demand for stable tokens has only gone up since this legislation has passed. I think there's an increasing awareness that there is going to be demand in the world for the dollar, and that's not an anti-Bitcoin or alternative monetary system statement. It's just that there is going to be demand for the dollar, and there is increasingly going to be distributed ledger technology used. And the intersection of those two things is going to drive demand for stable tokens. And I think in addition to that, which Mr. Land can speak to later, the likelihood of approval from the federal level for something that is only serving to increase the demand for US dollars is probably more palatable than something that is taking away from demand for US dollars.
Thank you, Mr. Revelle. Further discussion? All right. Seeing none, thank you very much. Any final thoughts? Anything to add before we move on to our next agenda item?
Mr. Co-Chair, if that was to me, none from
Yep.
our side.
Go ahead. Okay.
If that was to me, no.
Thank you. All right.
Public comment on that one?
Let's do public comment at the end. All right. With that, if it's okay with Director Lupien, I wanted to go to Mr. Land real quick. Is that okay? Or I know that you've got another potential call coming up, and I wanted to make sure that we're sensitive to your schedule. Would you like to go now, or would you like to wait until after Mr. Lupien? 11:45. How about sooner than 11:45? Because maybe nine something. Yeah. See, that'll probably work better for us in this time zone. It's a hardship. Yeah. Okay, perfect. All right. Mr. Lupien, please join us then. Welcome. Please introduce yourself to the committee, and we're happy to have you here in Jackson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members. I'm Steve Lupien. I'm the director of the University of Wyoming Center for Blockchain and Digital Innovation. The CBDI is committed to the founding mission of the university, which is developing educational research and outreach opportunities for the benefit of the people of the state of Wyoming and obviously our students. I'd like to begin with highlights and then a few legislative asks, if that's all right. So beginning with some of our highlights, the CBDI continues to grow. We now have 6 staff members as a member of the CBDI, and that includes an instructional designer with a computer science background. We have a project manager that is working on a number of projects that we're doing. We have a media and social media specialist. We have 3 student interns that are working on experiential programs. In this summer, we're going to be bringing on a number of permanent research staff. We also continue to host the YO Stampede, and this summer will be our 7th annual Stampede in the blockchain space. That's kind of a bit of a history. And we're also, as you know, we're spearheading a degree program at the University of Wyoming in blockchain. It's the first of any one Division I university. But now we're also sponsoring a number of student clubs on campus, such as the UW Blockchain Club, the UW Blockchain and Law Club. We are now also sponsoring the UW Robotics Club. And starting when we get back into session, we will also be sponsoring the Esports Club. And there's definite nexus between esports and digital innovation. We continue to be an interdisciplinary program at UW. As a reminder, we're affiliated with the College of Agriculture, Life Science and Natural Resources, the College of Business, the College of Engineering and Physical Science, the School of Energy Resources. And this summer, the College of Law will be joining the Blockchain Center as well, too. So from an educational standpoint, as I mentioned, we have our undergraduate degree. Several months ago, our program was ranked #2 in the country of all Division I universities, only behind USC. So it means we're better than Duke and MIT and Berkeley and a lot of other programs. So Wyoming is definitely punching above its weight in the blockchain space. We have just created a master's degree in blockchain for petroleum engineering, and will be being run out of our petroleum engineering department and the School of Energy Resources. We provide a number of experiential learning programs through partnerships that we have with outside businesses. We've graduated almost 200 students with the blockchain degree, and considering the program has been around for about 4 years, it's kind of like making wine. You can't sell it for the first couple of years. So we believe that number is going to begin to accelerate now. And it's going to be announced in July that the director's role at the CBDI will become endowed. And that means that all the salaries and benefits for the director of the CBDI will be covered by private donation. I mean, it's both a great honor, but it also frees up university resources for other endeavors. So it's good news across the board. From a research standpoint, no, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. From a research standpoint, as mentioned, we've done extensive research with the Wyoming Stable Token Commission, and we appreciate their confidence that they have in us. We've announced 2 months ago a new Bitcoin mining initiative. We're working with Bitcoin miners and energy utilities, not only in Wyoming, but around the country, to kind of help do some research and help them navigate kind of the changing environment that's happening in Bitcoin mining, especially with AI and some other things now creeping into that space. And we're also working with the UW Library and Museum System, and we're going to be developing a program to tokenize a number of the artifacts throughout that system. And that could also be eventually extended off the campus and to museums around the state. From an outreach standpoint, we created a program called Wyoming BEE program, BEE. It stands for Blockchain Education for Everyone. It's a digital literacy program for high school students, community college students, and adult education. And we do that in collaboration with the WIP program. and we continue to roll that out. And we are also working with several community colleges to help them develop digital asset programs, and that's actually going pretty well. One last thing, while blockchain has been the focus of the CBDI since its inception, it's now clear that this technology connects with a lot of other advancing technologies, blockchain, digital assets, cybersecurity, robotics, artificial intelligence, esports, and data analytics are all becoming more and more interconnected. So we at the Blockchain Center are now expanding more into a lot of those technologies across campus. And so I'll be, in the future talking a little bit more about that. That was always planned, which is why we, created ourselves as a Center for Blockchain and Digital Innovation. We had anticipated that as blockchain became more embedded, it would intermix with other technologies. So that's kind of where I am on highlights. I do have a couple of legislative asks, but I'd like to field any questions before I do that.
Great. Let's pause there and see if there are any questions. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Obviously, you've done a lot of really good work at the center, and I think we've had a great working relationship between what you've been doing and here at the committee. And I like to think we're really proud of that. You mentioned some of this mining initiative and some of the research. Could you maybe just touch on that a little bit more specifically about the research that is going on?
Sure.
Director Lupien, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, what we're doing, again, this is a brand new initiative, and there's a lot of changes that are happening in the Bitcoin mining space, particularly as it involves one, energy, and number two, Bitcoin mining, although it is similar to kind of the data processing centers, there are some very unique and different aspects of Bitcoin mining. So we're kind of looking in two ways. One is working with miners and helping them understand some of the new technologies around what's happening in power and energy, how power and energy is metered, how they can develop equipment that can project energy needs and be able to throttle up and down some of their equipment as a result, and that way getting the really the best rates and load balancing possible. So that's part of it. The other part of it is developing educational programs around Bitcoin mining. One of the partners we're working with has developed a program for repairing Bitcoin mining equipment, and it's somewhat unique to do that. So we are going to be building out a program to kind of teach those repair services through kind of a club format. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more in a second. But so making sure that as miners move into the state, notwithstanding what was announced last Monday about a Bitcoin miner in Cheyenne, which is a unique and special circumstance, miners are looking to continue to move into Wyoming. And on the same day as that announcement from the Biden administration, a very large mining company announced that they were actually coming into Wyoming. So we want to be able to make sure that University of Wyoming has the best trained students to be able to support those industries as they continue to move into the state.
Thank you, Director. Additional questions? Any follow-up, Mr. Chairman? Okay, Representative Singh, to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Lupien, can you talk to us a little bit about the esports and if that program is growing at all?
Director, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Representative, I'm taking over that program this fall, so I have somewhat limited knowledge about it. I can say that the Swing Club group is actually very disappointed because it's no longer the largest club on campus. So the esports club is growing. We are incorporating esports into the Wyoming Stampede. We did a test with it last year where we did a program for high school students to come onto campus and participate in a collaborative way. And then we invited a number of other universities in the area and had kind of an intercollegiate competition. That's actually growing rather quickly, the intercollegiate aspect of esports, and we'll start seeing, you know, league play pretty quickly, like you do football, basketball, baseball, et cetera. So other than that, Representative, again, I'm just trying to get my hands around it. Altogether on campus, I believe there's approximately 800 students that are involved in some way with esports, and on a campus of, you know, 10,000 students, that's a noteworthy number. You know.
Great. Thank you, Director. Follow up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the growth in numbers is great, especially considering it gets students involved in some sort of, you know, sportsman-like competitive activity without necessarily the hard costs of physical sports. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Representative Singh, you know, I joke about this, but I find it to be very true, is esports is kind of a gateway drug to digital literacy. And, you know, it is amazing, as I've seen, you know, students in my time at the University of Wyoming, the ones that participate in esports understand, for example, how things in digital format can have value, because inside games you have skins and loot boxes and other things like that, you know, quite frankly, you know, I come from the era where Pac-Man was built into a table that you played in a pizza joint, and to see how intertwined esports is becoming with just general technology is pretty amazing. And I'm one of these people also that believe that although the metaverse looked like it kind of came and went, in technology that happens all the time. It happened with the internet bubble. It happened with digital assets, and we're kind of, you know, coming out of that and growing. And I think that's going to happen with the metaverse as well too. And essentially, when you really think about it, the metaverse is a, you know, big esport environment where we all participate with our own objectives instead of the objectives of the game designer. So I really do believe that we're going to see a lot more things like metaverse universities and metaverse entertainment and things like that. And, you know, having robust esports programs makes it very easy to transition, you know, into these newer technologies that are coming about. So I'm very big on it, and you know, very optimistic about those nexuses.
Thank you, Director. And I've eaten a lot of pizza off of Pac-Man tables myself, so I'm right there with you. Any other questions? Questions before we proceed? All right. Online, I see none. Okay, go ahead, Director.
Yeah, yeah, just a couple of legislative acts, if you'll indulge me a little bit. In our rapidly evolving digital age, it's imperative that we update our internet protection and privacy laws to keep pace with technological advancements. The rise of new devices, platforms, and services has created unprecedented opportunities for innovation, but has also introduced new threats and vulnerabilities. Our current laws, many of which were crafted in a different technological era, are ill-equipped to address modern challenges such as data breaches, identity theft, and digital surveillance. By strengthening our cybersecurity requirements and enhancing data privacy protections, we can safeguard sensitive information, protect against cyber attacks, and ensure that individuals have greater control over their personal data. The CBDI, working with Cyber Wyoming and WyoCan, WyoCan is the Cybersecurity Action Network, have reviewed and made red line suggestions to a number of Wyoming's current statutes. We've been working with Senator Furphy, who unfortunately isn't here, and has forwarded him many of our recommendations. We are happy to work with this committee, which I think is the appropriate one, as well as LSO, to help support looking at making some, I think, needed changes to our existing laws. And I really do believe that we are a bit exposed presently, but I think making some fixes is actually a relatively light lift. So that is one of my asks. Another.
Let's pause there actually and see if there's any questions before we go to the next. Questions or discussion on that? Yeah, I think that, seeing that and working with the committee, understanding that better, maybe we can get a full presentation on that at our next committee meeting, and maybe even get it drafted up depending on what the circumstances are. Mr. Co-Chairman, thoughts?
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chairman, that was, I second those thoughts. That was exactly what I was thinking. Mr. Lupien, could you maybe just do a little bit, touch a little bit more on how you mentioned there's a little bit of exposure there, and maybe define that a little bit more for me if you could.
Go ahead.
If Mr. Chairman, thank you. If it's all right with you, there is a PowerPoint presentation, not that I'm going to give it now, that I'd like to forward to members of the committee that looks at exactly, where the rises in threats are coming from. And also some of those areas that need protection. If it's all right with you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to forward that to the committee members. And at a future meeting, I'd be more than happy to discuss this and discuss
Great.
that. And I would also suggest that we could bring some representatives from Cyber Wyoming and WyoCan to also answer that.
Great. Director, have you been working with the law school on that as well?
I hadn't been previously, but as you're aware, we have a new dean coming in, and we have met several times. And once she comes on board on I believe June 28th, we're going to begin laying out some opportunities where the CBDI and the law school will work more closely together. And I'll make sure that that's one of the things that we address.
Great, thank you. Further questions before we continue? Seeing none,
Okay.
continue, please.
Only two more.
Sounds good. All right.
Several years ago, this body passed a $1 million matching grant for blockchain education to begin on UW campus. That grant, along with matching gifts from private sources, funded the creation of the CBDI and what we call on campus WOBBLE, which is a Wyoming Advanced Blockchain Lab. It's an engineering-focused blockchain center in the School of Engineering. I'm pleased to announce that late last year, we used the very last portion of that matching grant and closed it out. And so what I'm asking for is a new $2 million matching grant to support some transformative programs that will position Wyoming at the forefront of digital innovation. And a couple of those, and this might be interesting to Representative Singh, who saw a really remarkable program in Cheyenne go away, which was the Array program. We're actually working with them. And so this grant will help establish a new coding camps, or establish some coding camps for high school students and adults. And it will be in collaboration with a major U.S. Microchip manufacturer that I'm not at liberty to discuss right now. Plus local educators like some key folks from Array. And these camps will equip our workforce with essential coding skills, prepare them for high demand careers. Additionally, this grant will help with the creation of a blockchain-based model ranch operation. It's a pioneering initiative that integrates blockchain, artificial intelligence, robotics, off-grid networking, and renewable energy sources. And furthermore, the grant will facilitate the update and expansion of the Wild Bee program that we've talked about. We did get some generous support from the WIP initiative, but with any technology, you know, it's moving so quickly that we already have to begin to update the program that we've created. But here's what's really also interesting about the Wyoming Bee program. We've got a lot of support from educational institutions outside of the state of Wyoming who want to license this technology. So by updating it, we actually and engaging in some marketing and awareness. You know, I believe that this could be a profit center for, and the money would go back through the WIP initiative because that's, you know, where the original funding came from, and, you know, really could be an alternative source of revenue. The matching grant, original matching grant, was absolutely crucial to Wyoming really being where it is today, as I mentioned, you know, number two program, and it makes it a lot more effective for us to be able to bring in outside donations because essentially their donation ends up being matched. So I'm hoping that that's something that you would entertain, and I'm willing to answer any questions you have on that.
Great question. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Mr. Lupien, I know you've done a really good job trying to stretch those dollars to the maximum on really good programs. Maybe just, if you wouldn't mind, and you'd have to do it immediately, but just could you do like a recap of everything that money has gone towards, including the matching money, just for the committee and for our edification, if that'd be possible?
Absolutely happy to. Yeah, in my next report, I can bring a you know, an itemized breakdown of exactly what money has come in and how that money has been spent.
Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chair, thank you.
Further questions?
Okay.
Go ahead, Representative.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Lupien. So is this sort of camp one that's targeted towards adults or towards students in the university? Can you help me understand who's eligible for this sort of camp?
The goal, because again, it hasn't been created yet, is to create coding camps, as I mentioned, that would involve high school students, community college students, and adult education. This came about actually because there was a very successful program like that in the Cheyenne area, and that program was acquired. It's you know, kind of a story we've heard, you know, many times. Because of its success, it was acquired by an outside entity, and that outside entity, you know, wasn't able to keep it the robust program in Wyoming that it was. And we want to bring that program back. And we do have a substantial donor that wants to support that with some matching grant support. And in many cases, we will bring back some of the individuals that were involved in the Cheyenne program. And so our goal through the chairman, Representative Yin, is to make it available to anybody who really wants to learn about coding. And we also believe that with the University of Wyoming involved, you know, we'll be able to get the word out a little better and maybe even have it, you know, in other places in Wyoming, and not necessarily just, you know, in the Cheyenne area.
Thank you. Follow. One question I have, this $2 million grant, the forward-looking one, it sounds like there is a partner available. Is that partner potentially willing to match that entire $2 million, a portion of it? So you're looking at $2 million as the umbrella, a portion of that would be matched, and then you want the rest, as we've had in the past, so that you can continue to go out with it. Okay, that was what I wanted to understand.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, we, as I mentioned, you know, having matching grants is an amazing fundraising tool. And so the past grant, there were, you know, off the cuff, I'd say 5 or 6 different donors that were able to have their donations matched. That is our intention as well too, is to satisfy some immediate donors for some of the programs that I mentioned, but then have that in our back pocket as we continue to grow and fund into the future.
Great. Thank you. Go ahead, continue.
Mr. Co-Chairman, thank you. Director, just one follow-up. Obviously, I know you've got access to some of those WIP dollars. My question is, for this potential a $2 million matching grant, would that be, from an accounting purpose, would the WIP dollars be eligible as well for that match, or are you gonna be using that 2 million for things outside of what WIP is eligible for?
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I don't believe that WIP funds can be matched. I mean, that would be the state matching the state. So in my mind, I hadn't thought about that, to be honest with you. It might be possible, but I hadn't entertained that. I look at matching grants again as a way of enticing, outside entities to invest in the state of Wyoming. And it's been pretty successful in doing that to date. We did participate in phase 1 of WIP with our B program, and we do not anticipate any future funding on the B program with WIP. I am participating in another WIP initiative that you may be aware of. It's the Digital Credentials WIP initiative. Laurel Ballard had made an ask through WDE in cooperation with the Wyoming Workforce Services. I am participating in that as a member, but that's not WIP money that's supporting the center.
Mr. Chairman, follow up. All right. Anyone else with follow-up? Seeing none, please continue.
One last,
more.
I promise.
Number
Okay.
3.
Lastly, I urge you to support legislation to create a comprehensive blockchain-based asset registry system. Leveraging the expertise and research at the University of Wyoming, this forward-thinking initiative will establish Wyoming as a leader in transparency, efficiency, citizen prosperity, and security, while ensuring privacy is maintained. This proposed registry will include real estate registry with standardized property data for seamless interoperability between the counties and the state, and a ZK, zero knowledge based proof of business ownership identification toolkit. So this certainly fits in with what happened last Monday. So what I'd like to do, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind,
Please.
is I'd like to introduce briefly John Belitsky, and I'd like to ask him if he could come up for a minute. He's the co-founder of Balcony, which is a company that is partnering with the University of Wyoming on this proposed project. And he has a lot more details about what the legislative changes would be needed. So with your permission,
Please, come on up. Yeah, go ahead.
Question.
Yeah,
Mhm.
please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Just as we're transitioning here, just to clarify a couple of things as we jump into this. So why limit it to real estate? I guess would be the first question. Why not any digital asset? And then secondly, how would this dovetail with already some conversations we've had about digital asset registry and then a lien registry as well, which we've taken up with the Secretary of State in prior conversations.
Director, go ahead.
through the chair, Mr. Ravel, absolutely there is other, registry of mineral rights, for example, and certainly the ones you've mentioned as well too. I think if the chair will indulge me, I think Balcony can represent what they're doing and how they plan on working with the university and the state. And then I think that might answer a lot of your questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Director. To you, please introduce yourself to the committee. Welcome. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, co-chairman, members of the committee. My name is John Belitsky. As Mr. Lupien said, I'm a co-founder at Balcony Technology Group, and we have been bringing government records pursuant to real estate onto the blockchain. I'm very happy to be here. I'd like to start again by thanking you all for the work that you do here, which continues to lead the world in a very good direction. So thank you for that. Mr. Ravel, to your question regarding the comprehensiveness of the proposal, it is my testimony that it is an absolute requirement that states develop comprehensive asset registries, including digital assets. When we speak of real estate assets, we're speaking of an incredibly expansive data set that includes mineral rights, it includes liens that may be directly relevant to the asset or simply an encumbrance placed upon the asset. We're talking about public lands, private lands. And so this is an incredibly expansive set of assets that we're describing that ought to include digital assets. Importantly, we feel that states have a responsibility to their citizens today to protect them from the types of cybersecurity threats Professor Lupien was discussing earlier, which have grown at, by some estimates, 100% year over year. And at the moment, the attacks that we've seen on county and municipality property records, and property records being the foundation of this country's prosperity, have come from smaller bit players. They have not come from sanctioned state actors from terrorist organizations yet. But you can imagine what would happen when these belligerent states begin to attack property records, which are often cases 40 years old, incredibly vulnerable, and are not backed up. So currently we have billions of dollars a year of cost that is being absorbed by American citizens as a result of the interruptions to business that have been caused by these smaller bit players attacking property records. Most of them are not reported. This number is set to explode. And so we feel that the use of the blockchain for this particular use is timely, it's necessary. And I want to point out that the reason why Balcony has partnered with the University of Wyoming to do this in the state of Wyoming is because this technology has the ability to collapse the space between code and law. And so to do this effectively and thoughtfully, you need to work with legislators that understand what I just said, that understand the threat of code becoming law and the thumb being on the scale against the citizens. And so the Wyoming way that Co-Chairman Western referenced earlier is absolutely imperative in how it guides a registry that protects property rights while protecting and bolstering individual citizens' privacy, which I'm confident that the state of Wyoming would not trespass upon. And so with that thinking, Balcony has entered into partnership with the University of Wyoming for a registry that would use zero knowledge proofs to protect those individuals' privacy, that would allow state registries and lien registries to be compliant with state laws and federal laws without trespassing on individuals' rights, that would standardize all of the data that represents all of these data sets so that municipalities, counties, the state and federal government could participate in an appropriate way with that data without trespassing on privacy. And so with that thinking, again, I urge you all to consider this legislation and continue to lead in this field, because it's also, I believe, very true that if successful, this would be the first place such a thing was instituted. And it is very likely that other states and other countries will, and I'll say this, they'll borrow a lot of this framework. And it is my hope that they borrow frameworks that are strongly in favor of individuals' privacy and personal rights and property rights.
Thank you, Mr. Belitsky. Questions? Follow-up, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Belitsky. Is there any reason why this initiative needs to be limited to assets in Wyoming? In other words, could an initiative like this provide a digital asset registry and lien registry that extends beyond the state of Wyoming, perhaps even globally?
Mr. Belitsky?
Thank you. Mr. Revel, the answer is this is absolutely extendable. You can move this beyond borders. What becomes relevant is, you have to ask the question of what is the state of Wyoming? The state of Wyoming is a piece of real estate that has a jurisdictional overlay, that has its own set of laws, its own set of regulations. And as we move beyond the borders of that piece of land, those regulations change. And so the architecture of such a system has to allow for this regulatory layer to adapt as you move beyond its borders, which should be part of its architecture at the onset and should make it extendable all over the world, as I mentioned before.
Follow-up, Mr. Revel? Good. Go ahead, Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Blitzky, for being here today. I think this is fascinating. You suggested that having a hard physical form of the proof of these assets is itself a risk to our security. Would moving forward with this type of idea require the construction of infrastructure similar to a data center to store this information? And would that type of infrastructure then be vulnerable to a different type of attack, like on our electric grid?
Mr. Belitsky.
Thank you, Representative Singh. The architecture that I'm proposing uses the blockchain, a federated blockchain, which is to say that there are papered, known, KYC'd, AML'd, contracted validators of this data. Each of these validators contains an entire copy of the entire blockchain. And so the state would know the location and the individuals who are operating these nodes at all times and could strategically place them in places to protect against interruption, disasters, or hacking.
Representative Singh, follow up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would we then be able to, as a state, be able to decide whether or not these validators are located within the state of Wyoming, or would it require that they would be other places?
Mr. Belitsky.
Thank you, Representative Singh. Not only would the state be able to make those rules and regulations around it, firstly, because it's the blockchain, those rules and regulations are not suggestions that are enforceable ex post factum. They are the rules for how the system works. So it is completely deterministic. Secondly, I would recommend that the state require that validators exist in the state. And in fact, in conversations with the University of Wyoming, the thinking was that one of those validators ought to be at the university, and that the state should operate some quantum of these nodes independently.
Any follow-up, Representative? You good? Further questions? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Mr. Belitsky, really appreciate you coming all this way to interact with the committee. We really appreciate that. I know kind of the crux of your ideas is that zero knowledge based system. And I think it's great. I think there's a ton of potential. You're aware of some of the work that we've done with our digital asset registry here with the committee and the Secretary of State's office. Obviously, that is not a zero knowledge based system. My question is, do you think it could be in the future?
Mr. Belitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Yes, I think it ought to be. I think that the state of Wyoming has an opportunity to demonstrate to the balance of this country and the rest of the world how to manage data in a way that supports individual citizens' privacy in a way that is not done in other states and in other countries. And that would include taking the digital asset registry and updating it to provide these protections for these citizens.
Thank you.
Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman,
Roger.
if you'll indulge me for a minute, I know this is a very technically savvy committee. But for those who may be listening or read the transcript later, I'd like to take a second and just define what
good
zero
idea.
knowledge proof is. It's a technology that allows you to validate information without disclosing the actual information itself. Probably the best example of, is, if you get carded at a bar, okay, how do they validate that you're over 18? Well, you have to tell them your birthday. It's on your driver's license. So you have to divulge, information that is personal to you simply to validate that you are of age to have a drink. Well, zero knowledge proof, and I'm simplifying this, is a technology that allows you to validate information without disclosing the actual base information itself. And I think that fits perfectly within the ethos of Wyoming, which is a very privacy-driven state. So I think the use of that technology, first of all, is going to grow exponentially, but it's also the perfect application for that type of technology. Would you like to add anything?
Mr. Belitsky, anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I am incredibly encouraged by the use of zero knowledge proofs in this country. Professor Lupien, that is exactly right. That is an excellent example. And this can be extended to any facet of data that requires this level of privacy. I think that the first use cases of this ought to be with these hard assets, property rights, and owned property within the state. And I think it ought to be done in incredibly simple ways that are extendable, that are modular, that create these binaries that can be chained together to form much more complex systems to oversee regulations. So to extend on what Professor Lupien said, that description is excellent. It will return for you just your age, not your address and so forth. But you can think about these things as these building blocks for privacy that when linked and built together can create incredibly robust systems that allow state administrators to make decisions about who has entered that bar without knowing their address on a state level. Once we can aggregate that data and return it and validate it as true. And so the implications for how you do business in this state are tremendous. And the beauty of it is, again, it protects individual citizens' privacy.
Excellent. Thank you. And obviously our next agenda item, once we're finished with this one, is going to be working with the Wyoming Secretary of State's office to talk about a lot of these same things and trying to build that system out, which we've been talking about for, I want to say 7 years now. Go ahead, Mr. Volitsky, final thoughts.
Yeah, as a final thought, I'd like to say that the system that I'm describing contemplates being interwoven with the state business registry system, which is unique, as you know, because it allows for anyone to register without disclosing their identity. However, there are state laws that preclude certain individuals who are foreign entities, who don't live in state, who are citizens of certain countries that are belligerent to the United States, from actually doing business in the state and owning land. And so this is precisely the type of use case where a zero knowledge proof can allow us to ascertain whether or not someone falls into one of these precluded categories without violating your citizens' rights in doing so. And so
Absolutely.
this registry that I'm describing ought to take as an input the business registry, as most private property is owned through an entity, through a business entity, an LLC or so forth in the state.
Great. Thank you. Final thoughts, Director.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for listening to our update and our legislative asks. I'll work through the chairman on our asks and hopefully we can move forward with those. But lastly, I just want to say how just how deeply grateful I am to this committee. Everything that we do in Wyoming around blockchain goes back to the support of this committee. We wouldn't have the #2 program in the country if it wasn't for this committee. We wouldn't have the popularity of our program at the University of Wyoming if not for this committee. So I just really want to express my gratitude for everything you do for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. We appreciate that. We certainly appreciate the incredible work you've been doing at the university. Let's get to #1. Excellent. All right. Thank you. And up next, we have Mr. Land from Senator Lummis's office. Please join us. And we all know you, but introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Land, General Counsel to U.S. Senator Cynthia Lummis. And I'll just start out with kind of what's going on in DC and kind of some forward-looking guidance, and then reserve the balance of my time for questions, if that sounds good.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot going on in DC. Surprisingly, the last few weeks, there's been just a flurry of activity in DC after, after the stablecoin debate has died out. Last week, both chambers of Congress for the first time passed a crypto bill. It was a resolution that disapproved of an administrative rule that was promulgated by the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2022, relating to whether you have to put crypto assets on the balance sheet of a publicly reported company, and how that plays into the capital requirements of the custodian, and how it's to be treated in bankruptcy. The House voted overwhelmingly with 21 Democratic votes to repeal that rule. The Senate voted on Thursday 60-38 to repeal that rule, and getting to that 60 number in the Senate is it's like climbing Mount Everest. I joked around to Chairman Rothfuss over the weekend that I climbed Mount Everest, and that's where the origin of that joke came from. Is getting 60 votes feels like climbing Mount Everest some days. But President Biden's expected to veto the bill this week. There is an effort to try to convince him not to veto the legislation. I think it's probably going to be unlikely, but we'll see how that plays out. On Wednesday and Thursday of this week, the U.S. House of Representatives is going to be voting on a comprehensive market structure bill to regulate crypto asset exchanges and to draw the line between the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. So drawing that line between securities and commodities. That is expected to pass as well, probably with slightly more Democratic support than the SAB 121 repeal. So I would look for something in the range of 30 Democrats probably to vote for that legislation. Obviously, Senator Lummis and Senator Gillibrand have their own proposal in the Senate. And there's expected to be a meeting of the minds at some point, with respect to market structure legislation that will probably be some kind of combination between the House product and the Senate product. We're particularly proud of our legislation and how we've drawn the line between securities and commodities. And, Senator Lummis and Senator Gillibrand are going to be having conversations with the McHenry staff and the Thompson staff and the Agriculture Committee, at some point in the next few months to try to reconcile the legislative products. So outlook for the rest of the year, I think the stablecoin debate someone's pushed pause on the stablecoin debate for the moment. I don't think we're going to be talking about stablecoins again until November and December, until after the election in the lame duck session.
Okay.
I do expect there to be a sizable push in November and December around stablecoin legislation. Obviously, Senator Lummis and Senator Gillibrand have a stablecoin product that got a great deal of technical assistance from the administration and the banking regulators and the state regulators. Senator Lummis and Senator Gillibrand believe their product more accurately preserves the dual banking system than some of the other proposals that are out there, which is very important to the state of Wyoming, as you can imagine. And at some point, we'll see the product that Chairman McHenry and Representative Waters have been working on for 2 years. No one's seen it. So there's been a lot of jokes made, but hopefully at some point this fall, we'll see the McHenry Waters product. And again, it'll be that process of conferencing the two products together. And there won't be, it'll be attached to a must-pass legislation, kind of the end of the year omnibus, or whatever legislative vehicle is available at that time. That, I believe, is it. Senator Lummis is still working to educate members on crypto assets, the technology, and why we need regulation. The vote total on Thursday, I think, is reflective of a lot of hard work that's been going on behind the scenes in Washington, D.C. We had a lot of offices that were kind of, on the fence about crypto, and they all broke our way on Thursday. So I think a lot of the offices, if you look at the vote total from Thursday, you'll see a lot of those offices are you're going to see again when it comes to the crypto debate. There's a great deal of pent-up demand to talk about crypto and how we should regulate it in the Senate. It just hasn't been a high priority for leadership until now. But that, I think I can safely say that on Thursday that has changed. So
It's incredible.
it's good news. So with that, I'll stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And before we get to questions, great work. I know how hard you've worked on this, but I know how hard the senator's office has worked on it overall, and the senator. It's incredible to see such bipartisan effort and hard work going towards constructive product. We don't see a lot of that when we read the news.
Tell me about it.
And so to see it being led by Wyoming is always incredible.
Yep.
Questions? Go ahead, Mr. Revel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, just to echo the gratitude to Mr. Land and Senator Lummis's staff for the good work that they're doing, and turning Senator Schumer, I think, was a big one. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, very handy. Yeah.
A question for Mr. Land, which is that the market structure reform bill, if I said that correct, would that have any potential to override the effects of SAB 121? In other words, if a digital asset is deemed a commodity, does that then reduce the likelihood that it has to be placed onto the balance sheet of companies holding those assets?
Go ahead, Mr. Land.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Revel, no, there would need to be bespoke language to kind of deal with that. Because it deals with crypto assets more broadly, and the SEC is the Securities and Exchange Commission, but Congress has also given the SEC control over accounting standards in every industry, as you know. So like, it's more of an accounting issue and less of a securities issue.
Follow up, Mr. Revel.
Separate question. If
Go
that's
ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Landit, can you share with us any thoughts or recommendations as it relates to the Wyoming Stable Token initiative that could better position us with regards to pending legislation?
Mr. Land.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Revel, one of Senator Lemus's top priorities is ensuring that Wyoming's hard work in this space is respected and protected in federal legislation, and that's one of the top things that we'll be examining any proposal with. So while like it's probably unavoidable, there may need to be some kind of changes, and it's not going to be perfect. Like we won't, you know, I would not foresee any kind of wholesale, you know, writ large changes to the Wyoming Stable Token in any federal legislation, because we will speak with our allies and, you know, exert some, you know, leverage over the process to make sure that Wyoming's hard work in this area is respected.
Thank you. Additional questions? Good. Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. You said that from what you're hearing that the White House intends to issue a veto. What are the reasons that you've been hearing for that, or what are their concerns?
Mr. Land.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Co-Chairman, the main reason is politics. You know, there's a certain faction within the administration that controls the White House that is allergic to crypto assets, and there is no logical reason for Staff Accounting Bulletin 121 to exist. The banking industry agrees, the bank regulators agree, the crypto industry agrees. It's a terrible precedent to set, and the only real purpose is just to provide a blocker between the traditional financial services industry and crypto assets. So it's more political than policy based. The arguments they make are placing crypto assets on the balance sheet increases transparency, you know, but at the same time, it also dramatically increases the bankruptcy risk, because it gives you the creditors another argument to argue in the bankruptcy court that it should be adding customer assets to the pot to distribute to creditors. So it does not protect consumer protection at all. It also makes it expensive and almost prohibitive for banks and trust companies to provide crypto asset custody services if they have to comply, because they have to hold $1 of capital for every $1 of crypto that they're putting in custody. And when in reality, it's not actually the custodian's own assets. They don't have legal title to any of the assets. It's held on behalf of their customer. So.
Great. Follow up. Good then. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Land, I'm sorry, one more question. Is there any support in either chamber for the concept of a central bank digital currency that you've seen or heard of?
Go ahead, Mr. Land.
It is a topic of interest to, I would say, you know, maybe half of the you know, Democrat Party in both chambers, but I think there are a lot of Democrats and nearly all Republicans that are opposed to a CBDC. And Chair Powell, too, at the Fed, has said that the Fed won't issue a retail CBDC without congressional authorization.
Any follow-up, Mr. Revel?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks. All right. Anything further? The one quick question I had is differences between the McHenry Waters projection, while you haven't seen it, and the Lummis Gillibrand.
Yeah. It's the dual banking system stuff. if you ask three people what the dual banking system is, you'll get three different answers probably. But I'll try to lay it out. Their approach to the dual banking system is making sure there is a state path that is not dependent on the federal banking supervisors to do anything to issue a stablecoin. Senator Lummis's view, based on our understanding of how the dual banking system has worked over the last 100 years, is that the state option should have the same powers and capabilities as the federal option, and that one shouldn't have an advantage over the other. It's based on a long old version of the McHenry draft. Senator Lummis does have some concerns about, while there is a state-only path, it does not have the same powers and capabilities as the federal charter. And is anyone actually going to choose the state charter in this model? They're all going to choose the federal option because it has preemption and there are fewer restrictions on how it can operate. There's actually a Fed chartering option too. The Federal Reserve has never had the ability to charter a bank in the past, and that's one of the things that is being talked about in the McHenry legislation. Senator Lummis's legislation, which we feel is most appropriate for the dual banking system, creates a state option and a federal option, but the powers are more or less the same. And while there is an asset cap on the trust company model at $10 billion, the state and federal banking charter have preemption and can operate across state lines, and looks somewhat similar to legislation the Wyoming legislature's passed in the past. So Senator Lummis believes that's probably a more appropriate form of regulation. And again, like everyone here knows, the final product's going to be some kind of combination of the two probably. So, but we are going to fight hard for the dual banking system provisions to make sure that Wyoming's hard work in this area is protected.
Great, thank you. Anything else? Anything else? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Land. We appreciate your hard work. Appreciate
Thank
you
you.
being here, and we'll probably want to hear from you
All right.
at other times throughout the day.
I'll be around both days, so if anyone wants to chat, just come grab me. Thank you. We appreciate your hard work.
Thank you. All right, with that, we're at public comment, and then we'll have a break. Let's see if we have any public comment. And for those that are looking for public comment potentially, a lot of what we talked about towards the end will be covered within the Wyoming Secretary of State's office discussion, where we'll be looking at Digital Asset Registration Act, lien registry, digital identity, and others. So for public comment at this point, specifically on the updates, do we have any public comment in the room? Seeing none at this time, do we have any public comment online? Well, that's very fortunate. That gets us right to our break. With that, we are on break for 15 minutes. Let's be back right around 10:35. All right, let's get started again. Our next agenda item is discussions with the Wyoming Secretary of State's office. We've got a few topics to work with here, starting off with Digital Asset Registration Act and Corporate Filing Systems Update. We have, I believe, online Secretary of State Chuck Gray and Mr. Colin Crossman, the Business Division Director. If we could bring them in, if they're out there in Zoom land. There we go. Okay, they're all
Hello.
together.
Yes.
Welcome. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate you being here with us virtually and look forward to hearing an update and then maybe have some discussions about how we can work together to build out some of the systems that we've been talking about over the last couple of years. So with that, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good afternoon, co-chairman and members of the committee. I, of course, am Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State. Today, I'm joined by Colin Crossman to my left. He is the director of our business division, and Joe Rubino to my right, our general counsel and policy director. First, want to thank the committee for having the remote testimony option. As many of you know, we're in the middle of candidate filing right now and also have a State Board of Land Commissioners meeting this afternoon. So this worked out very well. As the committee requested, our first topic concerns the Digital Asset Registration Act. And then we'll move on to some updates for the committee on our corporate filings. First, for the Digital Asset Registration Act. As the committee is aware, the passage of Senate Enrolled Act number 95 provides for the registration of digital assets with the Secretary of State. In accordance with the act, our office promulgated rules and procedures for its December 1st, 2023 implementation. Once these rules became effective and our filing system went live, we began receiving digital asset registrations in accordance with the legislation. We have received 5 registrations. We also wanted to provide a brief overview on the activity in our business division and address any questions from the committee. Our office has seen an exponential growth in both filings and revenue year over year, and projections show this growth will continue well into the future. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Crossman to talk a little bit about that exponential growth.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Crossman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As Mr. Secretary said, the office has seen exponential growth in filings and revenue, and I'll give you a little bit of color on that. This is both year over year and month by month comparisons. We have an $8.5 million increase in revenue in the last fiscal year, which equates to fiscal year 22 of having roughly 43 million to fiscal 23 having roughly 52.8 million. An increase in the scale of the business entities registered with the Secretary of State's office. In 22, there were approximately 509,000 active business entities registered, and in fiscal 23, that had risen to approximately 600,000. And so that equates to an increase in both online and physical paper filings. To show you a little bit more detail, fiscal 21 had about 355,000 total filings. 22 had about 408,000, and 23 had about 520,000. And these are not including UCC and EFS statements. These are just business filings, so LLCs, profits, nonprofits, and ancillary filings for those. UCCs will increase those numbers roughly 10% for each year. Naturally, the exponential increase in active entities and filings is an increased burden on the staff. As you know, we have 11 full-time employees. We handle all the manual filings ourselves, as well as phone calls. We pride ourselves on having a staff that answers phone calls very expeditiously, if not immediately, which is something that most other, if not all other states cannot admit to. We also handle walk-ins and a lot of other things like that. On the specific entity types that this committee is interested in, right now we have an active entities that are series LLCs of 1,241. That is as of this morning, and the DAO LLCs active right now of 497. As the secretary mentioned, we have 5 current digital asset registrations, and we are working. I believe, the DUNA goes live on July 1st, and we are working to make sure our system is ready for that. There's not much to do there since, as you all are aware, the DUNA Act was based off of the original unincorporated nonprofit act. So there's a couple of technical adjustments that have to be made, but fundamentally that is a very simple process. And so we anticipate it being live on the 1st of July with no issues there. And with that, on this point, I can stand for questions. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks. All right, any questions, committee, on updates related to where we're at with DAOs, DUNA, and also the digital asset registration? Go ahead, Mr. Rebel.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a clarification question, maybe for you or the office. The 5 current digital assets registered, can you explain what that is?
Yeah, any more detail on the 5 currently registered digital assets pursuant to the Digital Asset Registration Act? Is there more detail available?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I didn't pull the specific registrations this morning, but we have 2 independent registrations from 2 unique entities, and the 3 registrations from a single entity related to, I guess, a basket of assets from them. The very first registration, interestingly, I know you all are potentially familiar with the ordinals on the Bitcoin chain, though the first registration was of an ordinal inscription, and that individual tried very hard to make sure he was the first, filing it, I think, at 12:01 a.m. that morning. And it is a Wyoming flag, and registered to an attorney here in Cheyenne. But the other assets that have been registered, I didn't look into specific details other than to make sure that their registrations were compliant. But beyond that, we have had those 5 that have been registered.
Excellent, thanks. So we got the first post right away. Perfect.
Absolutely.
A quick question on those. How has the workflow gone on those? I mean, you don't have a tremendous number, but you've had, fortunately, a nice number probably to start with to understand the process that you have in place, as well as the statutes. Does it appear to be working the way that we want it to work? Is there more we should do?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I believe it's working fairly well as it was designed. It's entirely an online electronic process. There were a couple registrations that were submitted and then had to be removed and resubmitted. I think one of the individuals who filed it did the digital signature by typing in his personal name at first, not fully understanding that was supposed to be the digital signature as applied by the asset itself. So once that was hammered out, however, the other 2, notably the first person that filed, got it right straight away. So I think that was just the later individual not fully understanding what was being registered. But once that was hammered out, they got it done, and it seems to be working pretty well as is.
Great, thanks. Any follow-up? We good? Anything else there? Anyone online? Seeing none? Okay. All right, please continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Talk a little bit about the digital asset lien registry. As our office has previously testified, it may be useful for the committee to note how many digital assets have been filed with our office. We already talked about that, which is 5. It is important to note that the existing statutory scheme and framework currently allows anyone to file a UCC financing statement over any asset, including digital assets. Mr. Crossman, with the committee chairman's permission, anything to add there?
Go ahead, please.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have much to add here. I think with the discussion on digital asset lien registry or anything like that, we'd have to see what it is that's being proposed. But we do like to point out that our UCC financing statements, which are your traditional UCC style liens, they are digitally filed. And they can be filed in paper as well, but read broadly, the UCC financing statement can cover any asset of any kind. So how a digital asset lien registry would work in conjunction with that, we'd be interested to see what you have on that component.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Crossman.
Yes.
And before we go on, Mr. Secretary, I think we have some discussion from Mr. Revel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Crossman. Is that you just help me understand, would that filing system allow a searchable database? So to the extent that people wanted to search for lien registrations on a digital asset, that would be possible?
Go ahead, Mr. Crossman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The way I would anticipate it functioning right now is if in order to file a lien on a digital asset, a counterparty that was the leaning party would first want to require that digital asset be registered under the digital asset registration statute. And then once that is registered, there is a file ID number for that registration, which can be placed in the UCC financing statement's collateral description. I believe you would still be able to use that collateral description aspect if you didn't register it first. However, the problem with doing that is the collateral description part of the UCC is a, you can say anything you want, which the lien holder may not prefer that, because the asset description in the UCC, if it's not tied properly to a digital asset, then you have a disconnect, and the security interest may not attach to the proper asset that the lien holder is intending to lien. So by registering the asset, you've created the registration, and you've created the file and the lookup number in our system for that, which you then place in the UCC. So now the UCC is saying we are liening that asset that is specified in the digital asset registry. And if the person who is registering the asset has done something incorrect in that case, then you have a potential perjury claim or filing a false statement with our office claim. Whereas when you are just filing it on the UCC, it is the lien holder, not the person being liened, that is filing it. So you don't have the linkage of being able to proceed after the debtor if the description of the asset is incorrect. It's on the lien holder to make that description correct. But if the debtor has first been required to register the asset, then it is the debtor's description, and the debtor is the one making the statement to our office. And so they are potentially liable for a fraudulent misrepresentation at that point.
A great example of how straightforward the UCC always is. Mr. Revel, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Crossman. That explanation was helpful. So as I understand it, the digital asset would first need to be registered in the digital asset registration system, and then a lien could be placed against it. Is there then a registration system available for liens, and is that registration available for others to search?
Mr. Crossman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, there is an online searchable lien registry, or UCC registry. Is it searchable by the general public? I believe it is not. I believe you have to have a special login to be able to search. And now it is searchable by, people can call up and we will do a search of the UCC registry. There's a cost for that. But if you are a subscriber to the UCC system, which most large creditors, i.e. the banks and other entities that have an interest in those, in making sure that their liens are properly recorded, and if they're in the business of extending credit, they're going to want to make sure that the assets that they are securing are not over collateralized. Those entities generally have access to that system. To give you an example, that access allows for them to do searches, but also allows them to submit their UCC. So it's sort of you get the access and you have the ability to submit new documents as well as search. So it is not the same kind of search that our general corporate filing system has, where it is widely open to the public.
Is there a reason for that other than the technology? Is it desired to have that largely private, or is it just a limitation on the system?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe the reasoning for that is partially privacy and partially it's not an inherent limitation in the system. No, I'm not entirely sure why the initial decision was made to have it a bit more controlled than the other systems, but I think it is related to privacy. That system has been that way, obviously, since I've been here and long before that. But because if you do have unrestricted access to that system, you would be able to see, obviously, not just any digital asset that is being liened, but any farm asset, any car, well, any farm machinery, basically any personal property that is not real estate that is being liened in the state of Wyoming would be available for general search. Now, of course, these are public records, and public records requests can be used to search this, as well as individuals can request through our office to do searches, especially on their own assets, to see if liens are present or cleared or properly recorded. However, I think the decision was made at sometime in the past to just not have this particular database be widely open to the public.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Revel, any follow-up? Good. Select committee, anything else? Anyone online? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. So just for clarity, let me make sure I'm saying this properly. So I file a digital or a registration for a digital asset with you, assuming that it's filed properly. You authorize the application. For whatever reason, I am a debtor or a creditor of, say, the person who's claimed ownership of this digital asset. So I have to go through that process you just described, the UCC filing process, and in the event that I have not described the asset properly, it's an imperfect lien. Is that an accurate understanding, Mr. Crossman?
Mr. Crossman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll take this in two components. In the first component, let's assume that the digital asset was not registered, and so it is merely described on the UCC financing statement. If it is described imperfectly on the UCC financing statement, my understanding, and perhaps an attorney who actually does these day in and day out would be able to speak more thoroughly on this, but if the asset is described improperly in the UCC financing statement, it would be an imperfect lien. For instance, if you take it out of the digital asset realm and put it back into the usual personal property realm, if you were putting a lien on a piece of farm equipment that had, let's say, a VIN number, and the VIN number was incorrect, you might have a case for Scrivener's error. But if it was sufficiently incorrect, or there were multiple VIN numbers that were included and one of them was wrong, it's entirely possible that the lien would not properly attach to that asset, and therefore it would not be fully covered by security interest. So similarly, in the digital asset realm, if the digital asset is not properly described, then the UCC filing is not capable of providing the proper notice to successors in interest, and therefore it would not in my opinion, be a, accurately filed lien. And obviously there would be, courts would have something to say about that, but I think that that's the initial point of that discussion. In the secondary component where the person has filed a digital asset registration, placing the digital asset registration ID number in the UCC description of collateral, if you did that incorrectly, then obviously that would be the same problem as before. But that is just a copy and paste operation. So as long as you got that digital asset registration ID number into the description of collateral properly, then the improper description of collateral with respect to the UCC wouldn't necessarily apply. You would have to look at the digital asset registration. If that is incorrect, yes, the insufficient collateralization may still occur. However, now you have a situation where the debtor has filed a document with our office that was potentially fraudulent or false on its face at the time it was filed. Of course, we don't have the capacity or skill to delve into the sufficiency of every single digital asset out there and every class of digital asset out there. So it would be a felony at the moment they filed it, and so now you have an additional level of security in that not only have they committed a civil wrong against the creditor, but also a separate felony with respect to this office. So you've got an additional layer of protection there. Plus, because the digital asset registration would pre-exist the UCC and has a very specific, here is what you need to do to register the asset, the creditor can look at the digital asset registration, follow the lines of reasoning and say, okay, this is the asset you've said you wanted to lien, this is the registration, do these line up? Am I seeing the asset using the tools that are native to the blockchain and or the digital asset realm that is being provided? Can I find the asset? Is it there? Does it exist? Is it, are all the digital signatures lining up properly? If so, the creditor then has a higher degree of certainty that at least the asset that they are intending to lien is the asset that is being provided.
Thank you. Follow up, Mr. Co-Chairman?
They do not.
Okay. Mr. Rebel, when we started talking about this, it was before there even was a Digital Asset Registration Act, and I think we were thinking about it more broadly. Would you weigh in a little bit on that broader vision of what we've discussed we're looking for in the as a puzzle piece within the state system?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I think that the key is that the digital asset registration system is now in place, as Mr. Crossman has described. That needs to be in place, and the ID number needs to be there. The question is, can we make this all more commercially available to people outside of Wyoming or outside of an antiquated UCC system, such that liens can be placed easily, I shouldn't say easily, liens can be placed clearly on digital assets that can be searched, whether a digital asset has been encumbered with a lien or not, such that those digital assets could be used in a kind of broader capital markets, global capital market sense? And would that drive more registrations to Wyoming and more potential revenue for the state? That was the original concept. Whether that is, I'm not a UCC expert by any stretch, so whether that is legally practical or for the Secretary of State's office functionally practical is a question I don't know the answer to.
Great, thanks. Any response to that, Mr. Crossman or Mr. Secretary? Or
yeah, I think the one thing I would say, Mr. Chairman, is I think that we're happy to engage with you on the current process, and there is a current process. I do want to express that, as I did on the original bill, that I'm a little bit skeptical on that this is going to achieve an expansion in the registration. So, I certainly happy to engage with the committee, but I think it is important to, have some sort of market analysis / testimony on some of this before we just go headlong into it. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Any other thoughts? I see
No.
Mr. Kaufman's hand up. Let's go to Mr. Kaufman for a question or some thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just a quick question for the Secretary's office, and more just kind of following on to Mr. Reville's question. In past years, we've not only talked about building this digital asset registration system and then, potentially a lien system, but I think part of that conversation has been how that might work in conjunction with an API, so that there is, on-chain ability for entities to check registrations or to, on a smart contract basis, file some form of registry. Again, not meaning this question to sound accusatory. I'm just more curious. Is that something we think is in the realm of reasonable to explore? And has there been any more conversation about that? Do we think that kind of use case would make this more interesting? Because Mr. Chairman, I guess where I'm going, maybe this is a question for the committee in general. We kind of started down that path a number of years ago. And believe me, I'm very sympathetic to all the challenges that poses and, budget questions and things. But I just wonder if that's a piece of this that we've kind of moved away from in the last few years of discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. I think that is the purpose of this agenda item, is to see if we can get back to that, recognizing that there would be a tremendous value in having an API-driven online filing system for all types of corporate filings, UCC filings, digital asset registrations, liens, everything else. That type of a system can be incredibly powerful. We were talking earlier in the day about property filings and really trying to build out a system that is capable of doing these things in an integrated way and an enabling way, and that really would drive additional growth potential. I know that the Secretary was interested in updating the filing system and had an appropriations request last year. This might be an opportunity for us to find a way forward where we're getting all of our common interests together, and with the University of Wyoming potentially involved for the blockchain center, we might be able to build this out through a collaboration instead of having to just go to an RFP process. And that's something that maybe we can explore and talk a little bit about, where we have the resources and the capacity to build out this world-class system without going through standard procurement, hiring a one-off new architect and paying them one time. And then if you want to change a 1 to a 0 later, you have to go through the procurement process again. And it always seems to come back to us as a fiscal footnote of $1 million. I don't know why it always does that, but through that type of collaboration. So, Mr. Kaufman, that it's a good thing for us to revisit, because we keep coming back to this same place where, in my view, this is what is holding us back from really taking the next great leap in smart contracts and Web3. Go ahead, Mr. Kaufman. I see you want to respond.
And Mr. I'm feeling bad because I wasn't trying to put the Secretary of State's office on the spot here with this question. What I was more just getting at is, I think the Secretary's question and point raised was a really good one, and that is, we haven't actually heard, a ton of direct testimony about, people's desire to use kind of the lien registry system, not in comparison to what we've heard in past years about the desire for API-like functionality and the market that we know exists for that. Also understanding that's a much, much bigger lift, and that's a much bigger question, but we know that no state has moved on that. So there's a tremendous opportunity there. So that's more what I was just trying to get at, was exploratory. I was kind of worried that question came off bad.
No, I appreciate that. And, that core functionality gets to the other things that we have on the list. The idea of digital identity registration, there's a tremendous demand for that. E-residency type concepts linked to digital identity registration. So it's not just a corporate identifier, but just having the capacity to rigorously have an identification authenticator that is objective like a government, like the government of Wyoming, where as an individual, being able to register my identity with the Secretary of State's office and demonstrate, for example, that I have been KYC AML'd, that I have, this public address or maybe these series of public addresses, and seeing that through a Secretary of State as opposed to seeing that on an email is certainly a greater level of confidence. And if the Secretary of State's office countersigns it as, yes, we authenticate that this is a legitimate resident of the state of Wyoming that has achieved these various credentials, and then those credentials are countersigned cryptographically through whatever the credential authorizer is, my KYC AML is credentialed, whatever the case may be. That is what we're hearing demand for, and it's incredibly empowering. And that also then creates more interest and more applicability for the registered digital assets, which would be then potentially done in the same way as well as liens. When you start building that ecosystem, the functionality grows tremendously. Mr. Kaufman, did you have another comment you wanted to make? I see your hand is still up, but that might just be legacy.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'll take it down.
Go ahead. Okay. All right, Mr. With that, let's go back to the Secretary of State's office for comment. Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you. I'm ready to move to, I think we're ready to move to expedited filings. I want to, is that okay?
Well, back on the prior conversation real quick, any particular thoughts on just that larger ecosystem? That's one of the things that I think we wanted to really talk about, is tying into the corporate filing system update in a way that enables the work that we're doing without being redundant with what you're doing.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the corporate filing system update, we did not move, the legislature did not appropriate the funds for, so that is not proceeding. The legislature did not appropriate any funds for the request.
Right, but it was still an interest, I believe, Mr. Secretary, that you demonstrated. What would your thoughts be on, for example, a partnership with the University of Wyoming Center for Blockchain to build out that updated system in a way that's compliant with our blockchain interests, and do it through an ongoing relationship with the university rather than through an appropriation process where we have to get JAC to allow for the RFP to go forward?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think it's very important. This goes back to my legislative days, to have RFPs and competitive bidding, and I think that is a very, very important process. And I think some of the challenges that the previous administration talked about with the API, and maybe Mr. Crossman can elaborate on that. There are some challenges to that, but certainly happy to talk to anybody, and we're certainly all about innovation in the Wyoming Secretary of State's office. But I do think that we continue to see some of those challenges that the previous administration did.
Mr. Crossman, thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I mean, as you know, APIs there's nothing really special about APIs. Pretty much any software uses them unless it's an entirely self-contained piece of software that does not interface in any way with any other software, which is in this day and age a very boring piece of software. So, our current system has APIs. They're just not the kind of APIs that would be readily usable by any outside interest. And similarly, any new system that is developed wouldn't necessarily include APIs. The question is whether or not these APIs are documented for public consumption and exposed to public access in some way. Obviously, that requires a lot of security and a lot of doing that does make exposing a public API a bit more complicated and hence expensive. That said, many systems, modern systems, are designed with the concept of either public or semi-private, semi-public APIs. And in that case, I would mean that so a public API would be one where any person, regardless of their of their identity would be able to access an API. Usually those are read only. Sometimes there's a write aspect to them. A public-private API is not necessarily the sense of a government versus private sector. It would be an exposed API where an individual or entity would have to register with the API provider and provide some reason or payment in order to access that API that provides a bit more control over it. So those sorts of things, will all have to be hashed out when a new system is being built. But the concept of whether or not a system should or should not have APIs, the answer is, of course, it should have APIs. It's just whether or not those are exposed to the public and how and to what level and what access is being provided. That said, I think any new system would it would be folly for us not to design a system with some sort of outward-facing API. In a very, very rudimentary sense, we do have that now with the website. That is fundamentally what our website is doing, is accessing an API that is public. It's just not automated. So all of those things said, yes, a massive system update is required to do anything, and an API will necessarily be an element of that discussion.
Thanks. And I see Mr. Co-Chairman wants to weigh in. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I do appreciate the Secretary's point about, what is the true demand for something like this? I mean, I think going off the idea of Mr. Ravel, I think it's a really good one, but it feels like there's a lot of room for improvement here. Mr. Crossman, if you listening to how you just describe filing these UCC filings and these liens and all this stuff, it's a pretty clunky process. It's not very streamlined. It kind of reminds me, Mr. Co-Chairman, of a high mileage Gen 1 Cummins diesel. It works. It gets you from A to B, but there's a lot of room for improvement. And so, Mr. Cross, my question is this. I mean, are you familiar with any, off the shelf APIs, if you will, that would work in this type of scenario, this situation to facilitate that, that progress? Because I think if we could really streamline it, have an API that works well, that we might be able to unlock some of that potential demand that we're trying to suss out here.
Mr. Crossman, response?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This, with respect to the UCCs specifically, I do not know of any off the shelf that are available. I'm sure that there might be some out there. I'm not aware of any that deal with the UCCs. UCCs are, I mean, other than the various software vendors that do provide, such as our software vendor like Tecuity, there's I think maybe a handful of software vendors that provide the service for states. To my knowledge, none of them at this time provide a nice online automated API for filing these things. One of the concerns with any UCC is that they, in order for them to be perfected, everything has to be done basically everything has to be done perfectly. The idea being that if you file a UCC improperly, it's not perfect, it's not perfected, and therefore it doesn't attach to the asset. And similarly, if people are capable of, and this goes back, I think, to the KYC aspect that has been previously discussed. There is a pretty serious penalty if you file a UCC on a piece of property that you don't have the right to file a UCC on, and that basically it's effectively slander of title. So there's a lot of protections there to prevent these sorts of things from happening. And we, in some cases, we have seen people attempting to do this, and because of the human checks, sometimes these are caught. Similarly, you have people filing liens in the real estate offices in various counties. So things like that, at the moment, are still handled by human back checking. But it's all protected by the fact that if the lien itself is fundamentally flawed, then it has no legal effect. So how I'm not entirely sure how a fully automated system at the moment, with the way the UCC itself is defined, can, fully validate a filing to make sure it is both technically and legally compliant. But that said, right now, the system is we have human checks, and then if there's a problem, it ends up in the court anyway. So I'm not entirely sure if that was responsive. I apologize. You can ask me a clarifying question.
Mr. Co-Chairman, follow-up?
Yes, Mr. Co-Chairman, thank you. Mr. Crossman, I certainly appreciate, the UCC system is highly litigious and for good reason, right? You need, for proper lien perfection, things need to be precise. I think that we can all follow that logic and it makes sense. I still think, though, that there is that kind of gap of where we are now and certainly where we could be. Obviously, the Uniform Law Commission does not exactly move at a fast pace, but I do think that there are things that we can do to take initiative. And along those lines, Mr. Crossman, my question is, are there developers, whether it be Acuity or some of these other folks that could build that type of API system that could streamline this? Because I would imagine, or I would certainly guess, that a lot of folks in your position across the respective states say, well, it's so cumbersome, it's slow, let's just kind of throw our hands up and move on to the next thing. But I think if we all kind of really focus here, there's a lot of potential to be unlocked. So in your estimation, what would that take to build an API to really facilitate this process and make it much more convenient?
Mr. Crossman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, speaking at a high level, one of the fundamental problems with any asset registry is that I'll go back to the digital asset registry as an example of this. There's effectively an infinite number of assets because any asset can be subdivided into effectively arbitrarily, and that gets really interesting. And as I had alluded to earlier, when a person files a digital asset, we have we created a set of rules that attempts to place all of the burden on the person filing the asset to properly describe the asset, and we do not go back and check to make sure they've done it right. We check for technical compliance with the rules, but if the person has themselves inaccurately described the asset in our filing, we don't necessarily have a way of proving that or disproving that, because I alluded to the very first asset being a Bitcoin ordinal inscription. Well, that asset didn't exist when the law was when the digital asset registration law was being debated and passed the Wyoming legislature, and basically came into existence in the couple of month period between when the law was signed by the governor and went into full effect. So that our rules had to account for an asset type that wasn't even contemplated, didn't even exist at the time the law was passed. So it's very difficult to determine the metes and bounds of assets in this space that are moving super fast. Things are a little easier in the old school space of physical goods and physical personal property, because we've had things move a little slower and we have thousands of years of experience with those. But even then, those assets can be subdivided in ways that are fairly unique and interesting. So in order to properly do this, you would need an entity or a group that is designing a data set that would be capable of handling an arbitrary asset at any time. And that is, at the moment, in the UCC space, I am not aware of anyone who is providing a product that the state of Wyoming could pull off the shelf that is ready to go. And I'm sure that they're out there. There may even be one in the room with you right now that has a concept of that, in development, but I don't know of anything that is available today for off-the-shelf use.
Thank you, Mr. Crossman. Mr. Kaufman, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you,
Floor
Mr.
is yours.
Chairman. not another question, just a comment really, Mr. Chairman. And I think what Mr. Crossman just said was spot on. I think, maybe this is a suggestion, Mr. Chairman, for the committee just to consider, but maybe we need to spend just a little bit more time on that point of what Mr. Crossman is highlighting, because I think we've approached this in the past, as I'm kind of remembering the past years of discussion. We've kind of approached this in the past with maybe the misassumption, right, that we're going to develop some uniform, absolute way to file, a lien against these digital assets. And I think that's what Mr. Crossman's doing a good job of highlighting right now. And that is, the law doesn't provide for that in the UCC, right? When a bank or a creditor goes and files a UCC, it's on them to do that properly. And we don't prescribe that form. We don't prescribe that format. And if they fail to do that appropriately, that affects their lien rights. So that is, I wholeheartedly agree with what Mr. Crossman was saying there. For us to prescribe a specific methodology, for how digital assets are going to have a lien against them is a super slippery slope that is problematic. But that being said, there may well be, steps we can take to explore what that looks like, that the market would really like or desire, that isn't so prescriptive. So I just wanted to point that out, Mr. Chairman. I think Mr. Crossman was right on the money with that, but maybe for our committee, we need to turn our focus slightly in thinking about it a little bit more broadly than we've been thinking about it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. With that, we probably should move on to House Bill 79. We've obviously got more discussion ahead of us on this and can contemplate maybe over lunch if we want to take action or what that action might look like. But in the interest of time, Mr. Secretary, the floor is yours. We're talking about House Bill 79. We probably don't need to go through it in detail. We remember this as a bill that we worked through last year. This was allowing the Secretary of State's office to support expedited filings. And you can see on the second page of it, going into statute and providing for the possibility of a maximum of $5,000 fee to have an expedited filing. That doesn't necessarily give, you can see in the lines 13 through 15, the expedition of a filing shall not grant any benefit over a non-expedited filing for purposes of the timing of filing, but it just makes sure that you have your date certain and can get that registered more quickly. With that, Mr. Secretary, I know that you were prepared to weigh in on the legislation as we reconsider it. We kind of want to contemplate where it went wrong in the last legislative session and see if we can get it across the finish line again this time. So be happy to go to you for your thoughts on it at this point in time.
A few notes on House Bill 79 as it was debated during the interim and during the 2024 legislative session. First, by allowing the Secretary of State's office authority to set a fee and provide a process for requesting and approving expedited filings, the bill would have ensured necessary sideboards to expedite service where appropriate, while ensuring that many of the office's regular statutory filing deadlines of 15 days remain operable. The result, I think, is another tool that will make Wyoming more attractive to business entities looking for regulatory certainty. In speaking with the business community, there's much appetite for this certainty, and I think it's safe to assume that the passage of this bill will add to the exponential growth in business filings and revenue our staff of 11 full-time employees is facing. So there is that need for an amendment to add additional staff. That said, it is important to note the administrative burden on our office. As stated previously, our office saw a total increase, tremendous increase in revenue over the last several years. About 75% of this growth in revenue is due to our exponential increase in business entity filings. So increases in the numbers of filings themselves. We expect that this exponential growth will continue as Wyoming becomes more competitive. We also receive over 4,000 phone calls per month and over 3,500 pieces of mail each month. As it relates to manual processing by full-time employees, House Bill 79 will inevitably lead to increased burden as it will require human intervention to expedite the processing of filings. Our office explained this exponential growth and projected exponential growth to the Joint Appropriations Committee over the interim. We ended up on the House Bill 79 bill proposing a conceptual amendment for additional staff to meet these demands. The way it was drafted presented several issues, namely funding 2 permanent positions with special revenue instead of out of the general fund. Therefore, moving forward, we would request 2 additional positions to be paid out of the general fund. And I think it's very important to note that we provide for those positions to be general positions, meaning that they would also be able to do audits, which the Corporations Committee, we've talked with them about ramping up our audit process, which in the last administration was de-emphasized, and we've already ramped up. But we would like to do more with that. And then also addressing our increasing filings in the general filings themselves and our important need to meet that 15-day statutory deadline. So with that, happy to hand that over to you. And Mr. Crossman, you have anything to add with the chairman's permission?
Mr. Crossman?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can add a little more color on why the positions should be general positions and not special positions, and why they should have a general purview and not specifically focused on this if required. But in the interest of time, I'll let you get to questions before I do that.
Thank you, Mr. Crossman. Questions for the Secretary or Mr. Crossman? So, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Crossman, you know, I am curious about the need for positions in the context of this bill, not in the overall context of your office's responsibilities. I think that you've grown tremendously. Revenue's gone up $8 million. I have no problem supporting additional positions to support this, and you know, no worries there. I do see, though, that the objection to this bill became that it shifted from a policy bill to an appropriations bill, and then the Appropriations Committee killed it because they don't like to spend money, and so I don't think it lost on merit. I don't think anyone thought this was a bad idea. I think it just became an appropriations discussion, which is a worthy one, that rode along on this legislation. So I guess I want to understand a little better why this bill very specifically requires 2 more positions, not the office, which I agree needs 2 more positions. In fact, you might need more than 2 positions. I know that growth has been tremendous, so I have no trouble with that. But as I see this bill, it literally only changes the stack order. So if you have 100 filings pending, and number 37 wants to go to the front of the line, they pay $5,000 and go to the front of the line, and you still have 100 applications pending. There's no special treatment, no special consideration, no change in business process, nothing other than it gets resolved on a specific day as drafted. So, and maybe that was part of the discussion with the Appropriations Committee. Can we understand a little more why this bill and the actions of this bill as drafted originally requires 2 new staff positions, independent from the clear and obvious need in my mind for the Secretary of State's Office Business Division to have 2 more general positions?
Well, Mr. Chairman, a couple things on those comments. You know, in terms of your discussion of the legislative history, and certainly I've learned over time that people's views on why a bill did or didn't fail can differ. I would respectfully say that I had a little bit of a different interpretation. I think there was a lot there deeper than just the appropriation. I'd also emphasize that the bill did pass the Appropriations Committee. It just was not heard on the floor. But I think there were other comments from the Appropriations Committee. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think that you know, in terms of your second point on why it's important for us to have this discussion on the positions in this bill, is everything ties together. And so in terms of how this would work, that those expedited filings would move to the front of the queue. Well, we still have to meet our 15-day statutory deadline on everything behind that. And so that's the issue. And in light of all the other increasing demands on our office, the need for us to increase the audits in our office, the Joint Corporations Committee, and I absolutely agree with them, has been clear that in terms of our predecessor's view on auditing, that we need to ramp that up, and that was a priority for our administration from day one. There's a big problem there, and some fraud that we need to address, and entities that are being operated by foreign adversaries. And then on top of that, the need for us to meet our regular 15-day statutory deadline, that it was tied to the overall needs of our office. And when it became clear that there was probably that wasn't going to be addressed through the budget itself, we felt the need to talk about that in the bill itself. So certainly I would prefer those staffing needs to come through the budget itself. That would be my preference. But if that doesn't occur, then you have these increasing duties that are coming through the legislature, and we need to talk about what those increasing duties within these individual bills do to our office itself. And that's why it became part of that discussion, unfortunately. Anything to add, Mr. Crossman?
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Real quickly, how many, so this is an expedited filing of documents. How many document filings that are non-expedited, so standard document filings that this could apply to, occur in a year? Total.
Go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Mr. Chairman, let's see, where is this? I'm looking at quarters. Well, for instance, just for first quarter of 2023, this is calendar quarter, not fiscal quarter, but just first quarter of 2023, we had 61,000 documents come through. And so, multiply that by 4, you're looking at, a very, you're looking at a lot of documents basically, and we have 11 people. The question
So that's a quarter. Mr. Crossman, let me just follow up on that. The concern is you want, as I understand it, 20% growth in positions because of this bill, which provides the opportunity to expedite filing. I can't imagine more than 20 or 30 a quarter. It would be great. I mean, if every one of those 61,000 in a quarter did this, that would be over $300 million. I think we'd all just be celebrating and doing end zone dances around the Capitol at that point in time for the $300 million of additional revenue. And it would certainly justify the additional staff needed, but I'm really struggling with why this is a 2-position bill, because that's the kind of thing that kills a bill like this. This is a great service. We I think want to support the service, but I don't think this is the vehicle to get the 2 additional positions. And I'm really concerned with how any of us would justify to our colleagues in the legislature that this leads to a 20% increase in workload when you have 61,000 per quarter filings. And gosh, I'd be surprised if 100 ended up with this. And maybe there was an estimate. Was there an internal estimate or expectation of how many expedited filings at $5,000 would occur?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we weren't comfortable having an internal estimate. But again, as I said in response to the previous question, our ask in regards to this bill was attached to the fact that our general ask for addressing the increasing needs of this office was not addressed through the general fund budget and the budget itself. And so the reality is that we have increasing needs in this office, and we do what Delaware does with 11 people. Delaware has over 110. We're number 2 in the nation, and we have 1/10 of the staffing, and we're one of the few revenue centers of the state of Wyoming, and really the only other one is Game and Fish other than the Department of Revenue. And so that's why we had that ask on that amendment.
Thank you. Committee, any additional questions at this time on the bill? Mr. Kaufman, any final questions?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. All right. I think we're going to probably go to public comment at this point. Any final thoughts on all of this, Mr. Secretary, before we go to public comment?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And we really appreciate you taking the time today to be with us and to talk this through. Obviously, it's the beginning of a conversation that we'll continue to have. I think these are really important issues, and we appreciate your partnership on these issues. All right. With that, let's go to public comment. Do we have any public comment in the room on any of the topics related to Wyoming Secretary of State's office, which include digital asset registration, digital asset lien registry, digital identity registration, consideration of House Bill 79, which we obviously won't be passing any final form. All we'll discuss today is whether we want to redraft it for a 24 bill for next time, so we can talk through that after we have public comment. That would be the extent of action today. Any public comment in the room? Please join us. And even though you've already introduced yourself, please reintroduce yourself to the committee and welcome.
Thank you, Co-Chair. My name is John Belitsky. I'm with Balcony Technology Group. We bring real estate onto the blockchain for government. I wanted to provide some testimony in response to the Secretary of State's office initiative with the digital asset registry that they've completed. I specifically want to speak to the 5 registrations, which may discourage many people. But I want to provide a different perspective, which is that I believe that the opportunity here is to create essentially a new economy, because digital assets, which can have a very simple description, these can just be assets that are owned on the blockchain, where the last known owner is discernibly the array of owners, -1, the last person who owned it, continues to own it. That is a digital asset. And it's a unique opportunity for the state because it's not tethered to any specific jurisdiction. So a lender anywhere in the world could determine that because there is this asset registry and it is specific and it provides them with certain rights through the UCC process to undertake UCC foreclosures in a way that's expedient and understandable, and they can predict a good and quick outcome, they could choose to have those assets registered here as opposed to anywhere else. And as we know, they're not registered anywhere else at the moment. It's effectively a blue ocean new economy that could be made right here in Wyoming. And to do that, it requires specificity over how these contracts behave, how they interact with these digital assets. Rules-based permissions, for example, for what a lender is able to do. The determining factor of whether or not they have the right to foreclose on an asset is really a contract that's made between the lender and the borrower that is simply supported by state law. And that is my view. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And I think Secretary of State Gray's office has done something revolutionary that can prove to be incredibly profitable for this state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Belitsky. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. Any additional testimony in the room? Additional in the room, seeing none. Let's go to online. I see that we have Mr. Brendan Marr. Any other online? Okay. Mr. Marr, welcome. Good to see you again. And introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Oh, welcome. Can everyone hear me?
We can hear you, Brendan.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Brendan Marr. I'm an MIT Media Laboratory alumnus from '98. I'm on the working groups for digital identity, the Registered Digital Asset Act, the Wyoming DUNA supplement, well, the Wyoming supplement, and the just passed Wyoming DUNA Act. There's a number of comments I have here, and I really hope to provide to the committee and to the Secretary of State's office some thoughts on some paths forward as I see it. The first thing I'd like to comment on is, well, we've done something remarkable with the DUNA. What we've done with that is potentially a solution to help expedite some of the challenges here. I mean, specifically, the DUNA is an act that enables the creation of protocols. When we talk about APIs, we're really talking about protocols. And I'll just put it out there, not to discuss right at this moment, but maybe after I get through my other comments, the fact that going towards what the Secretary of State Gray has outlined, that we want competition, for those doing request for work. There's no reason why we can't consider or shouldn't consider or tease out or pull the thread of being able to have different DUNAs compete to create protocols for enabling some of these challenges and technologies that we have. So I'll just put that out there. We can come back to that. There's two other important points I'd like to make, but I'll concede the torch if there's any questions.
Any questions on that first point? Any questions? Seeing none, please proceed, Brendan.
Okay, yes. The second aspect, which I think is extraordinarily important, is the fact that when we look at the one of the main root problems in all of this is regarding digital identity. It is clear that when we go forward, we are going to need to look more specifically at the Notary Act and how that matches with a digital identity, and also, as we've talked many times before, the Commercial Registered Agents Act, or the Registered Agents Act, and the commercial part of that. Specifically, the Digital Identity Act says that digital identity should be proved out through a demonstration of principal authority. What this really means, as I've said many times before, is being able to, in the case of a notary, take a specific action to have a transaction, essentially, you could think of it as being re-signed, binding identity to that transaction. And there's different ways this can happen. There's different methodologies, but this is the root thing that needs to be solved here. Being able to bind digital identity and note, it's very important, in a private way. And this is what Wyoming has. The secret sauce that Wyoming has is the ability to do this in a private way through notaries, special notaries, smart notaries, and registered agents. I can take some questions on that, and I have one final note and a comment for some action in the longer term.
Thank you, Brendan. On anything on Brendan's second point, Brendan, that obviously gets to the heart of a lot of what we're trying to finally achieve, and you've been a part of the discussion on this for, I think, the full 7 years, is a system that allows us to utilize digital identities and cryptographic signatures in a way and broadly, and then interconnect those so that you've got corporations, you've got personal digital identities, organizational digital identities, as we talk about it. And then we've also been contemplating property aspects, the relationship. Notary is a good point, but enabling and empowering all of those things into one system that facilitates all of these advanced transactions. So yeah, I appreciate that point. And I think that is exactly what we need to work towards. And it seems like the pieces are finally starting to come together, where we have stakeholders that are capable of getting us there. Go ahead to your third point, Brendan.
Yes, and I should just add, I do want to come back to the Registered Digital Assets Act specifically. So really, it's 2 more points, if I may. But to get to the next point, it would be that practically speaking, how is all this going to roll out? I've been thinking about this, deeply, with all the challenges with the Secretary of State's office, the Notary Act and Commercial Registered Agent Act, which needs to be modified. There's a lot of pieces here, right? But the reality of the situation is, we can't do it all at once, and it's going to happen in pieces and piecemeal. We already have these statutes that, but we just got to have the right. We have the DUNA Act, which has been passed. Now that brings a whole new piece to all of this, because the DUNA Act, really what that's going to do is it's going to do something really remarkable, right? It's going to force essentially a new crop of registered agents, and this new crop of registered agents are going to, on the one side of the fence, they're going to be able to deal with and work with the Secretary of State as they need to. And on the other side of the fence, they're going to have to innovate and create the interfaces to the blockchain world. And I believe it's going to be from this nexus of smart registered agents, which will really begin to do the innovation here. And it will be the case that these new registered agents and new notaries, as we get that online, and really in some cases they should be the same, that we will be able to offload many of these challenges to those who are performing those services. And I'll take questions, but I want to go back to the registered digital assets and provide some clarity there.
Great. Thanks, Brendan. Questions on his third point? Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Mr. Maher, I mean, intuitively, it seems that at least I agree that there's going to have to be a discussion about revisiting registered agents, their capabilities, all that kind of stuff. But more specifically, what do you think in our statutes needs to be amended or updated in regards to the DUNA legislation that we passed?
Brendan, any quick thoughts?
Yes, a few thoughts. Well, first and foremost, the way it is currently written is that the DUNA Act provides for an administrative agent. Right now, that agent is not a registered agent. It might be the case where we would consider that they should be, or they could. I'm not necessarily sure if it needs to be. It probably should be either. But the point here is that there's all sorts of other things in here too, which are also related to solving the question which will come up later on in the day regarding AI. Right? You don't necessarily want to empower entities with autonomous powers if there's not a human in the loop, right? So there's that other conversation in this here too. But I hope that gets to a piece of what you're saying there. But
Mr. Chairman, any follow-up?
Go ahead. Do you have
Mr. Co-Chairman, thank you. Mr. Maher, so would that be just amending the language would that be Title 17? Corporations and partnerships. Is that what you're referring to, Mr. Maher? Changing it from agents to red.
I think that's
specifically
the bar that's actually, Mr. Maher, I think that's the lower bar that's actually in the UNA. And if I recall correctly, we can ask Mr. Coppin, he's familiar with it, but with the Uniform UNA Act, they could use a registered agent, but they don't have to. And I think we just emulated that. And in this circumstance, I believe they could use a registered agent, but they don't have to, consistent with the Uniform UNA Act. That's not to say we can't change it, but I think that's the motivation. Mr. Coppin, is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think I'm maybe slightly confused, but is the question just regarding the DUNA's ability to have a registered agent or the requirement for them to have one?
That is correct.
Yeah,
that's the question.
So the Act provides for DUNA's to have an administrator which can obtain a registered agent because they're not registered entities, right? That's the whole point of them, but there still is a service of process mechanism. So yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, Mr. Maher, briefly, let's get to your final point. We've got lunch ahead, and then we'll obviously have a lot more discussion in the afternoon. But I wanted to make sure you had a chance to weigh in on the Digital Asset Registration Act, which I believe was the final point you wanted to weigh in on at this point.
Yes, and the point there is regarding being able to provide additional services and clarity that would help towards solving the issues regarding improperly filed documents and liens, whatnot. And it goes towards the fact that one of the aspects in this which would be services that would help to clarify digital assets are the ability to enable other entities and auditors and service providers that could act as oracles to make statements on behalf of those digital assets as to their existence, their nature, et cetera, et cetera. In the blockchain world, we have all sorts of these types of things in the abstract in terms of proof of this, proof of history, proof of all sorts of things. It's really a matter of being able to say, well, can we take these other entities that are providing these auditing services and begin to create an ecosystem which allows them to be wrapped into this process of registration. And tied to all that is, of course, identity of them, right? And that actually goes back to the aspect of what I was just saying before about registered agents and DUNA too. There's all sorts of all sorts of services that those registered agents are going to be able to provide to DUNAs that you wouldn't actually have in existence for entities that are not crypto based, right? Because the crypto world has all sorts of different things that can be done in terms of auditing that just don't exist in the non-crypto world.
Excellent. Thanks, Brendan. Any questions or discussion? No,
And
all good
I have
points.
one call to action,
Yeah.
one minor call to action.
Sure.
For consideration. And it is the consideration, given that all this stuff is going to happen in a way in which it's going to be very ad hoc. We're not going to be able to get everything done at once. At a minimum, I think what would be constructive, which would be an extraordinarily low bar for the Secretary of State's office, is as these registered agents come on board that are providing these crypto services, that they just provide a list of who they are, right? So people know where to go to when they're creating their DUNAs or not DUNAs in specific, but anything related to these advanced notary services. You're going to need a list of who is providing and has the capability to provide these advanced notary services. So thinking about that is very constructive, I believe. I hope that helps.
Great. Yes, it does. Thank you so much, Mr. Maher. Appreciate it, as always. Mr. Pope, I see your hand up. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Maher, good to see you again. The question I have is, are there any specific changes that you would make to, I guess it's 1728-101, which is registered office and registered agents? Is there anything necessary that would have to change to that statute in order to enable the kind of the digital registered agent ecosphere?
Yes. Thank you,
Mr. Maher, go ahead.
Yes, and this goes towards also the Notary Act and its corresponding pieces of statute. I firmly believe that what needs to be changed is two aspects of both of those statutes. One is that there needs to be a reference in them, first and foremost, to the Digital Identity Act, and there needs to be a reference specifically related to the idea of a demonstration of principal authority and what that means. Because, the fact is, we really don't need to do anything, right? If you understand the laws that are already in existence that we put forth, and this goes back to the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act, the Uniform Electronic Transactions Act says everything. We really don't need to do anything further. But the fact is that you can't walk into a notary's office and have them function in terms of being able to, for them, do the process of demonstrating principal authority. They need to actually perform a operation in order to test that demonstration of principal authority. So, and the problem here is that notaries and the current crop of registered agents do not understand what demonstration of principal authority is, and they, more importantly, do not have the software and ability to do this. It's not hard if you understand these things. But it is something that, you know, they're not aware of because they're kind of old school. Let's just face it.
Right.
So by changing the
Thank you.
statute, it enlightens them that, you know, if they don't have that ability, then maybe they're not the ones to be doing this.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Marr. Any follow-up, Mr. Pope? Is it good?
I think that's good, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. I'm just looking for changes that we can make this year to the statute that would help and enable this. So if we can make those changes, I would be all for it.
Great. All right. Thank you, Mr. Pope. Appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Marr, for your public testimony today. Any further public testimony? All right. Seeing none, public testimony is closed. Back to the committee, and it is lunchtime. So if there's anybody that wants any quick discussion, we can do that. But we can also, I was contemplating at this point, maybe we go to the end of the day and we think a lot of this through, figure out what actions we want to take towards the end. Mr. Co-Chairman, does that sound good?
Mr. Co-Chairman, it does.
Okay. Then unless there's any final thoughts, all right, seeing none, we are adjourned until 1:30 p.m. See you all then and head off to lunch. Thanks, everyone.